I signed the divorce papers, without a single argument, gathered my children, and walked away while my husband celebrated his grand victory. He thought he had outsmarted me and left me with absolutely nothing. But by noon that very same day, the bank had frozen the secret offshore account he thought I would never discover, and one single transaction record revealed exactly which of my own family members had been helping him destroy me. My name is Rachel. I am 33 years old, and I work as a regional manager for a major electronics retail chain. I invite you to listen to the story of how blind trust almost cost me my life savings, and how a mother pushed to the edge will burn down a kingdom of lies to protect her children. It was a rainy Thursday night in late October, the kind of night where the cold seeps right through the window panes and settles deep into your bones. The house was dead quiet save for the hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock in our kitchen. It was past 1 a.m. I was sitting at my kitchen island surrounded by a fortress of paperwork. 2 glowing monitors cast a harsh blue light over my tired face. On the left screen, I was cross-referencing inventory logs for 14 different retail stores, tracking missing stock and calculating the quarterly bonus structures for my employees. On the right screen, I had my personal household budget open. I was always the one balancing the books. Between 60-hour work weeks, dealing with angry customers, managing understaffed stores, and constantly putting out corporate fires, I was the financial anchor of our family. I rubbed my burning eyes and took a sip of lukewarm coffee. My back ached from sitting in the same rigid position for hours, but I pushed through the exhaustion. I had to. I reached over to the counter and started assembling 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, carefully cutting off the crusts just the way my 5-year-old twins liked them. I packed them into 2 superhero lunchboxes, placing a little handwritten note inside each one. Everything I did, every grueling shift, every skipped lunch, every frayed nerve was for them. And it was for my husband, Thomas. He was a commercial real estate broker, a man who wore expensive tailored suits and projected the perfect image of a devout, reliable provider at our local Sunday services. But commercial real estate was entirely commission-based, and his income was a roller coaster of good months and terrifyingly bad ones. My salary was the steady rock that kept our mortgage paid and the lights on. I trusted him completely to manage our long-term savings while I handled the daily grind. The sudden violent slam of the front door shattered the quiet of the house. I jumped, nearly knocking over my coffee mug. Heavy, erratic footsteps pounded down the hallway. Thomas burst into the kitchen looking like a man who had just seen a ghost. His usually perfectly combed hair was a wet, tangled mess. His expensive suit jacket was drenched from the rain and hanging off his shoulder. His face was a sickening shade of ash white, and he was gasping for air as if he had just sprinted 5 miles in the dark. "Rachel!" He choked out, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "Rachel, we are in deep trouble." My heart slammed against my ribs. Without even thinking, my hands flew across my keyboard. My instincts as the financial protector of the family kicked into high gear. Within seconds, I bypassed my retail spreadsheets and logged directly into our joint banking portal. I checked the checking account, the savings account, the emergency fund. The numbers were all there, intact. I let out a sharp breath, turning back to him. "Thomas." "What is it?" I asked, rushing over to him. "Are you hurt?" "What happened?" He collapsed into one of the kitchen chairs, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook violently. "It is the brokerage," he whispered, his voice muffled by his palms. "We are being sued. A massive, catastrophic lawsuit from a former corporate client. They are claiming gross negligence and fraud on a multi-million-dollar commercial plaza deal I handled last year. They are saying I failed to disclose severe environmental hazards on the property." I stood frozen. "Fraud? Thomas, what are you talking about?" "You do everything by the book." He pleaded, looking up at me with wild, terrified eyes. "But my boss messed up the disclosures, and my signature is on the final closing documents. The client is coming after the firm, and they are coming after the brokers personally. They want $10 million, Rachel. $10 million. They are going to liquidate everything. They will take my business accounts. They will take my car. And they will come after our house. They will take the kids' college funds. The room started to spin. My mind raced through 1,000 terrifying scenarios. The house we had worked so hard to buy the safety net, I had sacrificed my youth to build, all of it gone in an instant. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We need to hire a lawyer right now. We need to fight this. We cannot fight a corporation with pockets that deep." Thomas cried, slamming his fist on the table. "It will take years, and the legal fees alone will bankrupt us before we even get to a courtroom." But I spoke to a defense attorney tonight. There is one way. One legal loophole to build a firewall around you and the kids. He reached into his drenched leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He pushed them across the kitchen island toward me. The paper was slightly damp, but the bold black letters at the top were unmistakable. Post-nuptial asset separation agreement. "What is this?" I asked, staring at the pages as if they were a venomous snake. "It is a shield, Rachel," he said, his voice dropping to a desperate pleading whisper. "It legally separates our financial identities. If you sign this, it transfers all liability solely to me. It states that our assets, the house, the savings, the investments, are no longer marital property subject to joint collection. We can move the bulk of the liquid cash into a protected trust under my sole management, shielded by a corporate LLC. The creditors will not be able to touch you or the twins." I flipped through the dense, confusing legal jargon. My brain, already exhausted from hours of inventory management, struggled to process the complex clauses. "But we are married," I protested. "Does this mean we are getting a divorce?" No, of course not," he said quickly, reaching out and grabbing my hands. His palms were ice cold. "Rachel, look at me. I love you. I love our family. This is just a piece of paper to satisfy the courts and the creditors. It is a temporary firewall. As soon as this lawsuit blows over, we tear this up and put everything back the way it was. But if you do not sign this tonight, they will file the liens by Monday morning. We will lose the house. We will be out on the street." I looked into his eyes. They were wide, red-rimmed, and brimming with tears. This was the man who held my hand in the delivery room when our twins were born. The man who prayed with me every Sunday. He looked completely broken, a man desperately trying to shield his family from a hurricane. My maternal instinct, that fierce, primal drive to protect my children at all costs, roared to life. I thought about my 5-year-olds sleeping soundly upstairs in their warm beds. I could not let them lose their home. I could not let them sleep in a motel because of some ruthless corporate lawsuit. "Are you absolutely sure this will protect the kids?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I swear it on my life," Thomas said, wiping a tear from his cheek. "I would never let anything happen to you. Just trust me, Rachel. Please, trust me." I took a deep breath. I reached for the pen sitting next to my cold cup of coffee. I did not read the rest of the fine print. I did not call my own lawyer. I simply relied on the blind, unwavering trust of a devoted wife. I signed my name on the dotted line, initialing every page he pointed to. With every stroke of the pen, I believed I was building a fortress around my family. When I handed the documents back, Thomas let out a massive, shuddering breath. He slumped back in his chair, running his hands through his wet hair. The sheer panic in his face seemed to evaporate, replaced by an exhaustion so profound, he looked like a deflated balloon. "Thank God," he whispered. "Thank God. You saved us, Rachel. You saved us." He stood up, kissed me on the forehead, and told me he was going to take a hot shower and go to bed. I watched him walk away, feeling a strange mix of relief and lingering anxiety. I cleaned up the kitchen, packed away my spreadsheets, and finally crawled into bed just before 3 in the morning. The next morning, the harsh sunlight streaming through the blinds woke me up. I felt groggy, my head pounding from the lack of sleep and the adrenaline crash of the previous night. I stumbled into the kitchen to make a fresh pot of coffee. The house was quiet again. Thomas had already left for the office, taking the signed documents with him. I poured my coffee and sat down at the kitchen island, pulling my laptop towards me. It was Friday payday, and the day I always paid our monthly mortgage. I logged into our joint banking portal, my eyes heavy. I expected to see my direct deposit clear and the usual balance sitting there waiting to be dispersed to our bills. But as the page loaded and the numbers populated the screen, my heart stopped. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, sure that the lack of sleep was playing tricks on my vision. But the numbers did not change. The balance in our primary joint savings account, the account we used for emergency house repairs, and the mortgage was wrong. $15,000 was missing. A cold chill washed over me. I clicked on the transaction history, my hands shaking so violently I could barely control the mouse. There it was, a wire transfer initiated at 6 o'clock that morning, hours before the banks even opened for regular business. $15,000 wired out of our joint account, but it had not gone to a lawyer for a retainer. It had not gone to a court escrow account to settle a lawsuit. It had gone to a private, out-of-state bank account. And the name on the receiving account was not a law firm. It was Thomas's name. I sat there, the hot coffee burning my throat as I swallowed hard. Thomas had told me the post-nuptial agreement was to protect our assets from creditors. But the creditors were not taking our money. Thomas was taking our money. And he had started draining the accounts the very second he had my signature, legally separating me from my own hard-earned savings. The catastrophic legal threat he had cried about the night before suddenly dissolved, replaced by a dark, terrifying financial mystery. My husband was hiding money, and I had just given him the legal permission to do it. The coffee in my mug had gone completely cold, but the chill spreading through my veins had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. $15,000. Gone. Evaporated into thin air mere hours after I had handed my husband the legal right to partition our lives. I heard the floorboards creak behind me. Thomas strolled into the kitchen, his hair perfectly styled, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive navy suit. He looked like a man without a single care in the world, humming a soft tune under his breath. The terrified, desperate husband from last night had vanished entirely. I stood up, pushing the laptop toward the edge of the island so the screen faced him directly. I pointed to the glowing transaction log. My voice was steady, trained by years of handling hostile retail customers and erratic vendors. "Thomas," I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "Why is there a $15,000 wire transfer, leaving our primary savings account at 6 in the morning?" He stopped dead in his tracks. For a fraction of a second, his confident mask slipped. His eyes darted to the computer screen, then to my face, and I saw a flash of genuine panic. But just as quickly, the slick commercial real estate broker returned. His posture stiffened, his jaw set, and he took a step toward me with an aggressive defensive energy that immediately set off every alarm bell in my head. In regional retail management, when a store manager's cash register comes up short, the guilty ones never apologize first. They get loud. They get indignant. Thomas was doing exactly that. "Are you seriously auditing me right now, Rachel?" He snapped, his voice echoing sharply in the quiet kitchen. "After the night I just had, after I stayed up begging lawyers to save our home from being seized, you are going to interrogate me over a standard asset transfer. A standard transfer," I repeated, not backing down an inch. "You wired $15,000 into a private account holding only your name." We agreed the post-nuptial document was a firewall against the lawsuit, not a license to drain my paycheck into your personal pockets. Thomas slammed his hand down on the granite countertop. The sudden noise made me flinch, but I held my ground. "It is an escrow sweep, Rachel." "Good grief. Do you think I'm stealing from my own family?" "Amanda told me to do it. My sister is a certified tax accountant, remember?" She advised me to move the liquid cash into a protected escrow account first thing this morning, before the creditors could file the preliminary liens. It is a holding account. He ran a hand over his face, playing the exhausted martyr perfectly. "I am trying to keep a roof over our children's heads, and you are acting like I am a criminal. If you cannot trust me, maybe you should just call Amanda yourself and ask her. I have to go to work and clean up this miserable mess." He grabbed his leather briefcase and stormed out of the house without looking back. The heavy wooden front door slammed shut, vibrating the walls. I stood alone in the kitchen, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He had thrown his sister between us like a human shield. Amanda, the woman who came over every Sunday for roast dinner, the woman whose freelance accounting business I had helped build by referring my own corporate colleagues to her. If Thomas was telling the truth, Amanda would have the escrow paperwork. But my gut, honed by years of spotting inventory shrinkage and corporate lies, told me a very different story. I did not go to work that morning. I called my regional director, took a sudden personal day, and dropped the twins off at their preschool. The entire drive to Amanda's house felt like moving underwater. The windshield wipers dragged back and forth across the glass, clearing the steady drizzle, but my mind remained entirely clouded. I kept replaying Thomas's reaction in my head, the sudden aggression, the immediate deflection. None of it felt like a man terrified of a massive corporate lawsuit. It felt exactly like a man who had just been caught with his hand in the cash register. Amanda lived in a trendy loft in an up-and-coming neighborhood, a place she could barely afford a year ago until Thomas suddenly started bringing her more wealthy clients. I parked my car down the street, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned stark white. I reminded myself to stay calm. I was not a frantic, heartbroken wife bursting in to point fingers. I was a professional auditor looking for a discrepancy in the ledger. I walked up the concrete steps and knocked on her door. It took nearly 2 minutes for her to answer. When the heavy door finally swung open, Amanda stood there in an expensive silk robe holding a mug of herbal tea. Her eyes widened in genuine surprise, and she instinctively took a half step backward. "Rachel," she said, her voice an octave higher than usual. "What are you doing here? It is a Friday morning. Are you not supposed to be doing your regional store visits?" I forced a warm, appreciative smile onto my face. "I brought a box of pastries from that bakery you love," I said, lifting the pink cardboard box. "I know it is early, but Thomas told me what you two did this morning. I just wanted to come by and say thank you." Amanda blinked clearly, thrown off balance by my calm demeanor. "Thank me." "Yes," I said, stepping right past her into the loft before she could invite me in, "for setting up the safe escrow account. Thomas was so frantic last night about the lawsuit, and when I saw the $15,000 moved this morning, I panicked. But he told me you arranged the protected holding account to shield our money from the creditors. I just wanted to drop off the pastries and get the escrow receipt from you for my own household records." The loft was surprisingly messy with financial papers strewn across the glass coffee table and a laptop glowing brightly on the kitchen counter. Amanda closed the front door slowly. I watched her body language closely, her shoulders tensed. She walked over to the kitchen counter and deliberately stood directly in front of her open laptop, physically blocking my view of the screen. "Oh, the escrow," Amanda stammered, picking up a pen and fiddling with it nervously. "Right, yes, the escrow. Thomas was just in such a panic, you know. I told him we had to move fast to secure the liquid assets." I kept my smile frozen in place, though my stomach was dropping into a bottomless pit. "That is exactly what he said," I replied smoothly. "So do you have the routing number and the trust documents? I just need to file them with our household budget spreadsheet, so I know where the mortgage money is sitting." Amanda let out a forced, breathy laugh. "Rachel, you are always so incredibly organized. Always the regional manager, right? Look, the paperwork is still being processed by the private bank. You know how these institutional transfers work. It takes 48 hours to generate the official trust documents. I will email them to you on Monday morning." She was lying straight to my face. A wire transfer into a legal escrow generates an immediate digital receipt. My heart began to race, but I nodded, pretending to be completely satisfied with her flimsy answer. "I understand," I said. "I am just so relieved." "Honestly, Amanda, I was terrified we were going to lose the house over this lawsuit." Amanda took a sip of her tea, her confidence returning now that she thought I had bought her excuse. She leaned against the counter, smiling condescendingly at me. "You worry entirely too much, Rachel. Thomas knows exactly what he is doing. He is a brilliant broker. He is just protecting his investments, especially with the new investment property. He cannot afford any legal liens popping up right now." The room went completely silent. The only sound was the rain hitting the large loft windows. The new investment property. The words hung in the air between us like a lit match in a room full of gasoline. I had managed our household finances down to the very last penny for 5 years. There was no new investment property. There was no extra money for commercial real estate ventures. We were saving every spare dollar for our children's college funds. I saw the exact second Amanda realized what she had just said. Her face drained of all color. Her eyes darted away from mine and her hand shook slightly, rattling the teacup against its ceramic saucer. She opened her mouth, trying to backtrack desperately, trying to shove the words back into her throat. She stuttered, her voice breathless and suddenly tight. The potential investments he was looking at. For the future, once the lawsuit is completely settled. I stared at her, the woman I had fed at my dining table, the sister-in-law I had treated like a true friend. She was standing in front of her computer, lying to my face, covering up a massive financial leak that involved a property I knew absolutely nothing about. The corporate lawsuit was a lie. The safe escrow was a lie. And Amanda was fully in on it. I did not scream. I did not demand to see the computer screen she was guarding with her life. If I confronted her now, she would call Thomas the second I walked out the door, and they would hide whatever they were doing, even deeper where I could never find it. I had to play the ignorant, trusting wife. "Oh, right," I said, letting out a soft, dramatic sigh of relief. "The future investments. Well, I will let you get back to work, Amanda. Thank you again for helping him sort this terrifying mess out." I turned and walked out of the loft, keeping my pace perfectly steady and unhurried until I reached my car. The moment I closed the heavy car door, my lungs seized. I gripped the steering wheel, gasping for air, as a full-blown panic attack washed over my body. The world was tilting on its axis. My husband was moving thousands of dollars into a secret account. His sister was covering his digital tracks, and they were casually talking about a hidden real estate property while convincing me to legally surrender my rights to our marital assets. I was being financially assassinated by my own family. I survived the rest of the day by running on pure adrenaline and survival instincts. I picked up the kids from preschool, cooked a warm dinner, and smiled pleasantly when Thomas came home. He acted like the perfect loving husband, kissing the top of my head and asking about my day. I played my part flawlessly, apologizing for questioning him that morning and telling him I trusted him and Amanda completely. He ate it up. His ego was so massive, he truly believed he had me entirely under his control. But as the night wore on, the ticking clock in my head grew louder and more insistent. I needed to see what was inside his computer. I needed to find out exactly where my money was going and what this new property was. I waited until midnight. I lay perfectly still in the dark bedroom until Thomas's breathing slowed into the deep, rhythmic cadence of heavy sleep. I carefully slipped out from under the duvet, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. I crept down the hallway, avoiding the third floorboard that always creaked and slipped into his home office. The room was pitch black. I closed the door silently behind me and approached his heavy oak desk. His high-end laptop sat in the center, closed and asleep. My hands were slick with cold sweat. I opened the lid. The screen illuminated the dark room, casting a harsh blue glow across my face. Thomas was always arrogant and careless with his local machine password. He used the same 4-digit PIN he used for our home alarm system. I typed it in and the desktop appeared. My eyes scanned the screen, rapidly searching for financial folders, bank statements, anything at all. But the local drive was entirely clean. It was practically empty. My heart sank. He was too smart to leave direct evidence on the hard drive. I opened his web browser, searching for saved passwords or bookmarks. There, pinned to the very top of his browser, was a link to a secure, encrypted cloud storage vault. This was where he hid his life. This was where the answers were buried. I clicked the link. The browser redirected to a stark black login page, but there was no password field. There was no place to type a PIN code. Instead, a sleek digital prompt appeared on the center of the screen, accompanied by a small flashing light near the top of the monitor. Biometric authentication required. Please scan fingerprint or face to unlock vault. I stared at the screen in absolute horror. A biometric lock. A physical vault key tied directly to his body. I could not hack a fingerprint. I could not guess a face scan. The money, the property, the entire truth of my husband's betrayal was locked behind a digital fortress I could not breach. Panic surged through my chest, hot and suffocating. I leaned closer to the screen, desperately looking for an alternative login option, an email recovery link, anything that could give me a backdoor into his secrets. Then the sound of the master bedroom door opening echoed sharply down the hallway. My blood froze in my veins. Heavy footsteps padded softly against the hardwood, moving purposefully toward the office. He was awake. He was coming down the hall. I stared at the glowing locked screen, trapped in the harsh light of the monitor, knowing I was seconds away from being discovered. The footsteps grew louder. The floorboards vibrated beneath my bare feet. I reached out my fingers, trembling violently, and slammed the laptop shut. The room plunged back into pitch-black darkness. My breathing sounded like a freight train in my own ears. I scrambled backwards, pressing my spine against the cold plaster of the wall, hiding in the darkest corner of the office behind a tall filing cabinet. The brass doorknob began to turn. The metallic click echoed in the silence like a gunshot. The door creaked open, throwing a sliver of pale hallway light across the carpet. I held my breath, my hands clamped tightly over my mouth. I was a prisoner in my own home, staring into the dark, desperately trying to figure out how to break into a digital vault before the man I married destroyed everything I had ever worked for. Sunday morning arrived with a deceptive stillness. The golden sunlight poured through our bedroom window, casting warm, familiar shadows across the floorboards. I lay completely motionless under the heavy duvet, listening to the rhythmic sounds of my husband preparing for church. Thomas was whistling a soft hymn while adjusting his silk tie in front of the vanity mirror. The scent of his expensive peppermint shaving cream drifted into the room, a smell that had once brought me a sense of comfort and security. Now it just made my stomach churn with a sickening wave of revulsion. He turned to the bed, offering me a look of practiced, deep concern. He placed a cool hand on my forehead, his touch sending an involuntary shudder down my spine that I desperately tried to mask as a shiver. He told me to stay in bed and rest, insisting that my terrible migraine was a sign I had been working too hard. He promised to take the twins to the Sunday service by himself, play the role of the devoted father, and bring me back some fresh soup from the deli down the street. I kept my eyes half closed, whispering a weak thank you, playing the part of the exhausted, grateful wife perfectly. I listened as he walked down the hall. I heard the cheerful voices of my 5-year-old twins, their little footsteps pattering against the hardwood floor as Thomas ushered them out the door. The heavy front door clicked shut, the deadbolt engaged, and then the low hum of his car engine faded down the quiet suburban street. The moment the house fell completely silent, the frail, sickly facade vanished. I threw off the covers, my heart hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. I glanced at the digital clock on the nightstand. It was exactly 9:15 in the morning. The Sunday service lasted an hour, plus 30 minutes of socializing in the fellowship hall and a 15-minute drive each way. I had exactly 2 hours before the man who was quietly destroying my life walked back through that door. I ran down the hallway and slipped into his home office. The room felt freezing, filled with the heavy scent of his cologne and leather furniture. My eyes darted to his work desk. He had taken his high-end laptop with him, the one with the impossible biometric lock that had nearly gotten me caught the night before. But sitting squarely on the corner of the heavy oak desk was his secondary machine, a powerful desktop computer he used for rendering commercial property models. My mind raced back to the digital infrastructure of his setup. Thomas was meticulous about his files. He always mirrored his cloud network across all his devices to ensure he never lost a contract. If the cloud drive was synced, the local files had to be hidden somewhere on this desktop hard drive. I pulled out the leather desk chair and sat down, my palms slick with cold sweat. I wiggled the mouse and the large monitor flared to life, illuminating the dark room. The screen displayed a standard login prompt. It required a master password. I typed in our anniversary. Incorrect. I typed in the twins' birthdays. Incorrect. I tried the security pin for our house, his childhood zip code, and the date he founded his brokerage. All incorrect. The system warned me that I had only a few attempts left before the computer initiated a security lockout. Panic began to claw at my throat. I stared at the blinking cursor, feeling the precious minutes slipping away. But then the analytical survivor side of my brain took over. I managed regional operations for a massive electronics retail chain. When a point-of-sale terminal crashed at one of my stores on Black Friday, I did not wait for corporate tech support to fix it. I knew the back doors. I knew how Windows operating systems hid their local administrator privileges. I just needed to bypass the front-facing security interface entirely. I forcefully rebooted the machine, holding down the specific key combination to interrupt the startup sequence. The colorful graphics vanished, replaced by a stark black screen filled with lines of white text. I booted the computer into safe mode with command prompt capabilities. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in strings of system override commands I had memorized from years of troubleshooting broken store registers. The mechanical keyboard clacked loudly in the silent room. Every time the house settled or a tree branch brushed against the window, I flinched, my eyes darting to the office door. The ticking clock in my head was deafening. It was 9:45. The command prompt accepted my override. I bypassed the user profile entirely and forced the computer to log me into the hidden core administrator account. The screen blinked, went completely black for a terrifying 5 seconds, and then the standard desktop background appeared. I was in. I did not waste a single second. I opened the File Explorer and navigated straight to the system folders. I knew the biometric lock from the web browser could not protect the raw offline files saved locally on the machine. I searched for the hidden app data folders, drilling down through layers of encrypted directories until I found the master sync folder for his cloud drive. I clicked it. The folder opened instantly, revealing dozens of meticulously organized subfolders. My eyes scanned the list. Client portals, tax documents, legal drafts, and then at the very bottom, a folder simply titled Personal Wealth Management. I clicked the folder. Inside was a single comprehensive spreadsheet and a series of downloaded bank statements from a private wealth management firm located 3 states away. I opened the most recent PDF statement dated just 2 days ago. The document loaded on the large monitor. I stared at the screen, and the air completely left my lungs. The account was registered solely under the name Thomas. There was no mention of my name, no mention of our joint trust, no mention of our marriage at all. And the total available balance sitting in that secret account was an astounding $450,000. I covered my mouth with both hands, physically stifling the gasp that tore its way up my throat. $450,000. It was a number so massive, so incomprehensible, that my brain initially refused to process it. I scrolled down the page to the transaction history, my vision blurring with a mixture of rage and absolute devastation. I looked at the deposit records. I recognized every single one of them. There were the exact amounts of my regional manager quarterly bonus checks funneled out of our joint account the very same day they had been deposited. There were the steady, agonizingly slow transfers from the savings account I had set up for the twins' money. I had skipped meals and bought thrift store clothes to save for their college education. He had systematically bled my salary dry month after month, year after year, hiding behind his fake financial planning spreadsheets. But the salary theft did not account for the sheer size of the balance. I kept scrolling, my eyes burning. And then I found the source of the largest deposit. A massive lump sum transfer of $250,000, labeled as an incoming disbursement from a home equity line of credit. My heart stopped beating. The room started to spin violently. I opened the subfolder labeled Property Documents and found a scanned copy of a loan agreement. It was a secondary mortgage drawn directly against the equity of the home we currently lived in, the home I had put the original down payment on. I scrolled to the final page of the loan document to look at the signatures. There was Thomas's familiar sweeping handwriting, and right next to it, on the line designated for the CEO owner, was my signature. Only I had never signed that piece of paper. I stared at the forged signature, my entire body trembling with a cold, terrifying fury. The loop of the letters was slightly off. The pressure of the pen was entirely wrong. Thomas had forged my signature to leverage our family home to the absolute hilt. He had taken out a massive secret loan against the roof over our children's heads, legally putting me on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, while he hid the cash in a private account. If the bank ever called in that loan, I would be financially ruined, bankrupt, and homeless. The sheer scale of this betrayal was paralyzing. He had not just lied to me, he had financially assassinated me. The tears that finally spilled over my eyelashes were not tears of sorrow or heartbreak. They were tears of pure, unadulterated hatred. I glanced at the clock on the bottom right corner of the monitor. It was 10:30. Thomas would be leaving the church fellowship hall right now. He would be buckling the twins into the back seat of his car. I had less than 20 minutes before he pulled into the driveway. I quickly grabbed the portable hard drive I had brought with me and plugged it into the desktop. I highlighted the entire personal wealth management folder, the forged loan documents, the secret bank statements, and hit copy. The progress bar appeared on the screen, slowly filling with green. Time seemed to crawl at an agonizing pace. 10:35, 10:38. While the files were copying, I noticed another folder labeled Real Estate Transactions. My hand hovered over the mouse. The progress bar was at 80%. I knew I should just eject the drive and cover my tracks, but my instinct screamed at me to look inside. I clicked the folder. Inside was a single active document titled Final Closing Instructions. I opened it. It was a wire transfer authorization form filled out and ready to be submitted to his private bank. I read the details and the floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. The authorization was for an outgoing wire transfer in the exact amount of $450,000. It was scheduled to be executed today. The memo line read simply, Cash Closing Lakefront Estate. My mind violently snapped the final pieces of the puzzle together. The fake lawsuit. The panicked demand for me to sign the post-nuptial agreement last night. Thomas was not just hiding money for the future. He was planning to spend every single cent of it today. He had forced me to sign away my legal rights to our marital assets so that he could drain the secret account this afternoon, buy a luxury lakefront property in pure cash, and leave me holding a massive forged mortgage debt on a house that was about to be foreclosed on. The file transfer completed with a soft chime. I ripped the hard drive out of the USB port and shoved it deep into my pocket, but my eyes remained locked on the wire transfer form. He was buying a multi-million-dollar estate in cash today. But an estate of that magnitude required far more than $450,000. He was only paying for half. I scrolled down to the bottom of the wire authorization form, looking for the receiving title company. Right below the wiring instructions was a secondary signature line for the joint purchaser of the estate. The name was typed out in bold black letters. I stared at the name, the breath completely knocked out of my lungs. Thomas was not buying this house alone. He was buying it with someone else. Someone who had the millions required to fund the other half of the property. Someone who was waiting for him to finalize the transaction today so they could start their new life together on the ashes of mine. I heard the distinct crunch of tires pulling onto the gravel driveway outside. The heavy rumble of Thomas's car engine vibrated through the walls of the house. He was home. I rapidly closed all the windows, cleared the recent files cache, and initiated the computer's shutdown sequence. The screen went black just as the front door handle began to turn. The cheerful voices of my children echoed in the entryway. I stood alone in the dark office, clutching the stolen hard drive in my pocket, my heart pounding a furious rhythm. Thomas was walking into the house believing he had successfully outsmarted me. He believed he was hours away from executing his grand escape. But as I listened to his heavy footsteps approaching the hallway, a new, far more terrifying question burned in my mind. Who was the other name on that contract, and exactly how many people in my life were helping him destroy me? The heavy silence of the house pressed against my eardrums. I stood frozen in the pitch-black office, my spine pressed hard against the plaster wall behind the filing cabinet. I listened to the sound of Thomas walking down the hallway, his heavy footsteps moving past the office door and continuing toward the master bedroom. He had not come looking for me. He had just gotten up to get a drink of water. The dull thud of our bedroom door closing echoed through the quiet house. My lungs burned as I finally let out the breath I had been holding for what felt like an eternity. I waited another 10 minutes in the dark, listening to the relentless drumming of the rain against the window pane until I was absolutely certain he was back in bed and fast asleep. Slowly, I crept back to the heavy oak desk and opened the laptop lid just a fraction. The screen flared to life, illuminating the dark room with its harsh, unforgiving light. The encrypted cloud drive was still open. The wire transfer authorization form was still glaring at me. I forced my trembling fingers to steady the mouse and looked back at the secondary signature line on the lakefront estate contract. The name typed in bold black ink seemed to leap off the screen and wrap its hands around my throat. Brenda Sterling. The air rushed out of my lungs. I sank into the leather desk chair, staring at the name until the letters blurred into a meaningless shape. Brenda Sterling was a wealthy, controlling widow in her late 50s who had inherited a massive logistics empire from her late husband. She was also Thomas's most lucrative and demanding real estate client. For the past 2 years, she had been a constant looming presence in our lives. Thomas complained about her endlessly. He would roll his eyes when her name flashed on his phone during our family dinners. He told me she was lonely, overbearing, and required constant hand-holding to close any commercial property deals. I had felt genuinely sorry for her. I used to pack Thomas's nicest ties and iron his dress shirts when he had to take her out to expensive business dinners to secure her listings. I had even baked her a basket of artisan holiday cookies last Christmas, telling Thomas to deliver them to her penthouse so she would not feel so alone during the holidays. The sheer blinding humiliation of my own naive kindness washed over me like a wave of physical nausea. I had been ironing my husband's clothes for his dates with his mistress. I needed to see the rest. I needed to know exactly how deep this rotting foundation went. I navigated back to the main directory of the cloud drive. My eyes scanned the meticulously organized folders. Next to the property deeds was a folder labeled simply Appraisals. It seemed innocuous enough for a real estate broker, but my retail management instincts told me that people who hide things always use the most boring labels possible. I double-clicked the folder. It was not full of property valuations or commercial zoning permits. It was a digital graveyard of my marriage. The folder contained hundreds of saved emails, text message logs, and digital photographs. I opened the first email thread. The vulgarity and raw intimacy of their exchanges made my stomach churn violently. They were not discussing commercial leases. They were discussing their future. Thomas wrote to her with a sickening, devoted tone he had not used with me since our honeymoon. He promised Brenda that he was finalizing the legal paperwork to rid himself of his boring, overworked retail manager wife. He assured her that the post-nuptial agreement was the final key to leaving me completely empty-handed, so I could never go after his future wealth. I opened a subfolder of photographs. There were pictures of Thomas and Brenda on weekend getaways he had claimed were out-of-state real estate conferences. Pictures of them drinking champagne on a private balcony in Aspen. Pictures of him kissing her cheek in a luxury restaurant while I was back home changing diapers, managing retail spreadsheets, and pinching pennies to pay our mortgage. But the most devastating part was the financial strategy outlined in their emails. Brenda was incredibly wealthy, but she was also notoriously cautious. She had demanded that Thomas prove he was an equal partner before she would agree to buy the luxury lake house with him. She wanted him to put up half the cash for the multi-million-dollar estate, so he would not look like a complete gold digger. Thomas did not have that kind of money on his own, so he had stolen mine. He was using my life savings, my children's college funds, and the illegal home equity loan forged in my name to fund his half of their romantic dream home. He was burning my children's future to the ground just to buy his way into a wealthy widow's bed. I did not cry. The initial shock had entirely burned away the sorrow, leaving behind a cold, calculating rage that sharpened my senses to a razor edge. I was no longer a heartbroken wife. I was a regional auditor, staring at a severely compromised ledger, and I was going to find every single rat in the building. I backed out of the appraisal folder and opened my portable hard drive, rapidly dragging and dropping the entire folder of explicit emails and photographs into my encrypted backup. While the progress bar slowly ticked across the screen, I opened another folder labeled Tax Preparation. If Thomas had been hiding $450,000 in a secret private bank account and forging home equity lines of credit, there had to be a massive paper trail. The Internal Revenue Service does not simply ignore hundreds of thousands of dollars moving through personal accounts. Someone had to be doctoring the numbers. Someone had to be washing the digital footprints so the federal government would not flag the sudden influx of hidden wealth. I opened the primary accounting ledger for the current fiscal year. I scrolled past the legitimate commercial real estate commissions and the standard household expenses. Then, I found a separate isolated expense column tied directly to the secret private bank account. Every single month on the first day of the month, there was an outgoing wire transfer for exactly $5,000. I followed the row across the spreadsheet to see the receiving vendor. The payee was listed as Apex Financial Solutions, LLC. I frowned, racking my brain. I did not recognize that corporate name. I opened the attached digital invoices corresponding to the payments. The invoices were intentionally vague billing for tax obfuscation services, portfolio restructuring, and liability shielding. I looked at the bottom of the invoice for a signature or a contact name. There, stamped in crisp professional lettering, was the name Amanda Vance. My breath caught in my throat. Amanda, Thomas's younger sister. The woman who came to my house every Sunday. The woman who sat on my living room floor and played puzzles with my 5-year-old twins. The freelance accountant whose struggling business I had single-handedly kept afloat by paying her a generous retainer to manage our family taxes. Apex Financial Solutions was just a registered shell company she had set up to funnel the stolen money. My own sister-in-law was not just turning a blind eye to her brother's infidelity and theft. She was the architect of the financial deception. I opened the archived tax returns from the previous 2 years, my hands moving with frantic precision. I pored over the line items, using every ounce of financial literacy I had acquired in corporate retail. Amanda had manipulated our joint tax returns with terrifying skill. She had routed Thomas's stolen wealth through a maze of phantom business losses and inflated commercial expense deductions, effectively making the $450,000 completely invisible to the Internal Revenue Service and to me. She had doctored the home equity loan, categorizing it as a restricted commercial liability, so it would never show up on our standard household credit reports. She was being paid $5,000 a month in stolen money to help her brother leave my children and me completely destitute on the street. The pure, unadulterated sociopathy of it was staggering. I remembered how Amanda had sat at my dining room table just last week sipping the wine I had bought, complaining about how hard it was to make a living as an independent accountant. I remembered how she had casually criticized my worn-out blouse, suggesting I treat myself to something nice for once. She had been wearing a designer watch, purchased entirely with the money she had helped steal from my children. I furiously highlighted the entire tax folder and dragged it onto my portable hard drive. I needed every single fraudulent invoice, every doctored spreadsheet, every piece of metadata that proved Amanda was an active co-conspirator in this federal crime. But as I opened the final PDF of our joint federal tax return for the previous year to verify the deposit routing numbers, my eyes landed on the final page of the document. I stopped breathing. The blood drained completely from my face, and a fresh wave of primal terror washed over me. There at the bottom of the federal tax return, right next to Thomas's signature, was my own signature. It was perfectly replicated. The slant of the letters, the pressure of the ink, the exact way I crossed my initials. Amanda had not just hidden the money. She had forged my signature on federal tax documents to authorize the fraudulent filings. The devastating reality of my situation crashed down on me like a collapsing building. I was completely trapped in a perfectly designed legal snare. My initial burning instinct was to grab my children, drive straight to the local police precinct, and slam the portable hard drive down on a detective's desk. I wanted to scream from the rooftops. I wanted to march into Amanda's trendy loft and tear it to the ground. I wanted to drag Thomas out of bed and confront him with the explicit photos of Brenda. But looking at my forged signature on a federal document, I realized exactly what would happen if I struck blindly. If I went to the authorities right now, Thomas would hire the most ruthless defense attorneys his stolen money could buy. He would look at the police and claim that the secret account was a mutual investment strategy. He would claim that I knew about everything. And he would have the ultimate proof to back up his lies. He would point to the fraudulent tax returns and show the federal investigators my signature. Amanda would sit in a witness chair crying fake tears and swear under oath that I had signed those documents right in front of her. She would testify that I was a willing participant in the tax evasion scheme. The explicit photos of Brenda would just look like the motive of a jealous, vindictive wife trying to frame her husband after a messy affair. The Internal Revenue Service does not care about broken hearts or ruined marriages. They care about federal tax fraud and wire fraud. If I blew the whistle right now, without perfectly untangling this legal web first, I would not just lose my life savings. I would be indicted as a co-conspirator in a major financial crime. I would be sent to federal prison, and Thomas would be granted full, undisputed custody of my 5-year-old twins. They had thought of everything. They had built a flawless cage around me, ensuring that even if I ever discovered the truth, I would be too terrified of federal prosecution to do absolutely anything about it. I sat in the dark office, trembling violently as the cold, hard logic of the situation settled over me. I could not confront Thomas. I could not scream at Amanda. I had to smile. I had to make them eggs for breakfast. I had to kiss the man who was plotting to destroy me, and I had to thank the sister-in-law who was forging my signature to fund her designer lifestyle. I had to make them believe their plan was working flawlessly, so they would remain arrogant and careless. I watched the final file transfer complete on my screen. I safely ejected the portable hard drive and slipped it deep into the pocket of my sweatpants. I closed the cloud vault, cleared the browser history down to the last tracking cookie, and shut down the desktop computer. I meticulously wiped my fingerprints off the keyboard and the mouse using the sleeve of my shirt. I pushed the leather desk chair back into the exact position I had found it. I walked out of the office, stepping silently over the creaking floorboard in the hallway, and slipped back into the master bedroom. Thomas was snoring softly, wrapped in the warm duvet, dreaming of his luxury lakefront estate and his wealthy widow. I lay down on the far edge of the mattress, staring up at the dark ceiling. The tears had completely stopped. My heart was no longer racing with panic. It was beating with a slow, heavy, relentless rhythm. They thought they had trapped a naive, exhausted retail manager, but they had forced a mother into a corner, and they were about to learn exactly how dangerous a woman can be when she has absolutely nothing left to lose. The countdown had officially begun, and I was going to burn their entire kingdom to ash. Saturday afternoon arrived with a mocking, bright blue sky. The summer heat hung heavy over our manicured backyard, completely at odds with the freezing terror running through my veins. I stood on our wooden deck with a pair of metal tongs in my hand, flipping chicken breasts on the sizzling grill. Thick white smoke billowed up into my face, giving me a convenient excuse for the tears that kept threatening to spill over my eyelashes. Every single muscle in my body was pulled as tight as piano wire. I was trapped in a grotesque domestic theater, forced to play the role of the blissful, ignorant wife, while standing mere feet away from the two people who were actively conspiring to ruin my life. Thomas was out on the lawn pushing our 5-year-old twins on the tire swing he had built last summer. The sound of his deep, booming laughter mixed with the pure, innocent giggles of my children. He looked like the picture of absolute perfection. He wore a crisp polo shirt and expensive khaki shorts, playing the part of the devoted, loving father. Just watching him smile made my stomach churn with a violent wave of nausea. I knew exactly what he was hiding behind that flawless smile. I knew about the secret bank account, the forged home equity loan, and the luxury lake house he was buying with his wealthy mistress. I knew he was planning to abandon his children and leave me holding a mountain of fraudulent debt. But I could not scream. I could not throw the burning coals at his feet. I had to swallow the bile rising in my throat and smile back at him. I had to make him believe I suspected absolutely nothing. The sliding glass door behind me glided open, and the sweet, cloying smell of expensive perfume hit my nose before she even spoke. It was Amanda. My sister-in-law walked onto the deck, holding a crystal glass filled with a mimosa, looking like she had just stepped out of a high-end fashion magazine. She wore a pristine white linen sundress and a pair of designer sunglasses that easily cost more than my first car. She leaned against the wooden railing, sipping her drink, and let out a long, dramatic sigh of contentment. She told me the yard looked absolutely beautiful today, completely oblivious to the fact that I was gripping the metal tongs so hard, my knuckles were turning white. I forced the corners of my mouth to curl upward. I told her I was glad she could make it to our family barbecue. She waved her manicured hand dismissively, saying she would never miss a weekend with her favorite brother and her darling nieces and nephews. I watched her take another sip of her mimosa. This was the woman whose freelance accounting business I had practically built from the ground up. This was the woman I cooked for every single Sunday. And this was the woman who was secretly charging my husband a $5,000 monthly retainer to doctor our federal tax returns and hide hundreds of thousands of dollars of my stolen money. Amanda lowered her sunglasses, letting her gaze sweep over me from head to toe. Her eyes settled on the faded navy blue cardigan I had thrown over my simple cotton dress. I had owned that sweater for 4 years. I wore it because I had stopped buying new clothes for myself to ensure we had enough money to put into the twins' college savings account. The very same account she had helped Thomas drain empty. "Rachel, you really work far too hard," Amanda said, her voice dripping with a sickly, sweet, condescending pity. "You look completely exhausted, and that cardigan has definitely seen better days. You are a regional manager, for heaven's sake. You need to start treating yourself to nicer things. You should not be walking around looking so worn out when Thomas is working so hard to provide a beautiful life for you." The sheer breathtaking audacity of her words felt like a physical slap across the face. She was standing on my deck, wearing designer clothes purchased with the money she helped steal from my children, and telling me I looked worn out because I was sacrificing my own needs for the family she was actively destroying. A dark, violent urge surged through me. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and demand to know how she could look me in the eye. I wanted to tell her I had seen the fraudulent invoices. I wanted to tell her I knew exactly how she afforded those sunglasses. Instead, I let out a soft, self-deprecating laugh. I flipped another piece of chicken on the grill, keeping my eyes focused on the rising smoke. "You are probably right, Amanda," I said, keeping my voice light and breezy. "I have just been so focused on saving for the future. But Thomas told me how brilliantly you set up that new escrow account to protect us from the lawsuit. I am just so lucky to have a sister-in-law who looks out for our finances so carefully." I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye. For a fraction of a second, her smug expression faltered. A tiny flicker of panic crossed her face, but she quickly masked it with a wide, artificial smile. She took a large gulp of her drink and told me it was what family was for. I turned back to the grill, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. The barbecue dragged on for 3 more agonizing hours. I served them potato salad. I poured them iced tea. I played the absolute fool. But the moment they finally left, the moment the house was quiet and the twins were asleep, my performance ended. The fragile, exhausted wife was gone. By Monday morning, I had taken a covert personal day from my retail management job. I dropped the twins off at their elementary school, double-checked to ensure Thomas was occupied at his brokerage office, and drove directly into the heart of the city. I did not go to a standard family law practice. I went to a towering glass and steel skyscraper that housed one of the most ruthless financial fraud and asset recovery firms in the state. The conference room was massive, sterile, and freezing cold. I sat at a polished mahogany table that seemed to stretch on for miles. Across from me sat Marcus, a senior litigation attorney with a reputation for tearing corrupt executives to pieces, and Sarah, a brilliant forensic accountant who specialized in offshore tax evasion. I did not waste their time with tears or emotional stories about my broken heart. I unzipped my purse, pulled out the encrypted portable hard drive, and slid it across the smooth wooden table. I told them my husband was stealing my life savings to buy a luxury estate with his mistress, and his sister was forging my signature on federal tax returns to hide the money. I told them I needed a legal strategy to stop the wire transfer without getting myself indicted for the tax fraud Amanda had framed me for. Marcus and Sarah plugged the drive into a secure terminal and began reviewing the files. The room was absolutely silent for nearly 45 minutes, save for the rapid clicking of a mouse and the low hum of the air conditioning. I watched their expressions change from professional curiosity to genuine grim shock. They saw the explicit emails with Brenda. They saw the secret bank statements. They saw the $5,000 invoices from Amanda. And they saw the forged signatures on the federal tax returns. When Marcus finally pushed himself away from the keyboard, he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at me with a mixture of profound professional respect and deep, grave concern. Rachel Marcus began, his voice low and serious. The level of premeditated financial deception here is staggering. Your sister-in-law has constructed a highly sophisticated tax shelter using phantom commercial losses, but the most dangerous weapon they have used against you is the post-nuptial agreement you signed on Thursday night. I leaned forward, my hands tightly clasped in my lap. I told him Thomas had manipulated me into signing it by claiming we were facing a catastrophic lawsuit. I told him it was signed under false pretenses. I believe you, Marcus said, leaning his elbows on the table. But the family court system operates on cold, hard paper. On its face, that post-nuptial agreement is completely legally binding. You willingly signed away your marital rights to the liquid assets. To void that agreement, we have to prove fraud and coercion. We have to prove the lawsuit was a fabrication, and we have to untangle the forged tax returns to prove you had no knowledge of the hidden funds. Sarah, the accountant, chimed in, her expression incredibly serious. Proving fraud of this magnitude requires a full civil trial, Rachel. It requires extensive discovery phases, sworn depositions, subpoenas for the private bank records, and a forensic audit of Amanda's entire accounting firm. It is entirely possible to win, but it is a process that takes months, sometimes years, to fully execute. A heavy, suffocating weight settled over my chest. I looked back and forth between the two experts. I told them we did not have months. I told them the closing date on the luxury lake house was this coming Friday. Thomas was scheduled to wire $450,000 to the title company in 4 days. If we waited for a civil trial, the money would be gone. Sarah nodded slowly, turning her laptop screen toward me so I could see the property contract I had pulled from Thomas's hidden cloud drive. She pointed to a specific clause buried deep in the fine print of the real estate transaction. "It is actually much worse than you think," Sarah explained, her voice entirely devoid of comfort. "I ran a background check on Brenda Sterling, the woman co-signing this property. She does not just hold her money in domestic accounts. She utilizes a complex network of offshore trusts located in jurisdictions that do not comply with United States civil asset forfeiture laws. Once Thomas wires your stolen money to this title company, Brenda's legal team will immediately absorb the asset into her offshore portfolio to finalize the joint purchase. Once that money crosses international banking lines into her trust, it becomes virtually untouchable. Even if you win a fraud case next year, you will never be able to physically recover the cash." The air completely left my lungs. The sterile conference room seemed to shrink around me. Thomas and Amanda had not just planned to steal my money. They had planned a flawless financial execution. They were washing my salary and my children's college funds through a wealthy widow's offshore empire where I could never reach it. "We have to freeze the account," I said, my voice rising with desperate urgency. "We have to stop the wire transfer before Friday. Can we take this evidence to a judge right now and request an emergency freeze?" Marcus shook his head slowly, a grim shadow falling over his face. He pulled a fresh stack of paper from a file folder his paralegal had just handed him. He placed the papers gently on the table in front of me. "I ran a search on your local county docket while Sarah was reviewing the ledgers," Marcus said softly. "Thomas did not just manipulate you into signing a post-nuptial agreement last Thursday. The very next morning, the moment the courts opened, his legal team filed an expedited, uncontested divorce petition on your behalf." I stared at the paperwork, completely paralyzed. An uncontested divorce. He had used the post-nuptial agreement to bypass the standard separation waiting periods. Marcus continued delivering the final, devastating blow. He is leveraging a specific loophole in the state family law code. Because the post-nuptial agreement states there are no disputed assets, and because he filed it alongside a waiver of discovery, the local magistrate has fast-tracked the dissolution. The judge is scheduled to sign the final divorce decree this Friday morning. The silence in the room was absolute and terrifying. The entire monstrous architecture of Thomas's plan was finally laid bare in front of me. The timeline was not a coincidence. It was a perfectly synchronized financial assassination. If Friday arrived and I did nothing, the judge would sign the divorce decree, legally solidifying the fraudulent asset separation. An hour later, Thomas would wire the $450,000 to the title company. The money would instantly wash into Brenda's offshore trust. By the time I picked my children up from school on Friday afternoon, I would be legally divorced, completely broke, and holding a forged home equity loan that would leave me homeless by the end of the month. The clock was not just ticking, it was hammering a death knell. I had exactly 4 days to dismantle a flawless legal trap, stop an offshore wire transfer, and destroy my husband's empire before it buried my children and me forever. I looked across the mahogany table at the lawyer, my hands no longer shaking. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, absolute resolve. I asked him exactly what we had to do to spring the trap shut on them instead, because I was not going down without burning them to the ground first. The atmosphere inside the high-rise law firm was heavy thick, with the kind of tension that makes it physically difficult to draw a full breath. Marcus, my lead litigation attorney, leaned back in his heavy leather chair. He stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the gray weeping skyline of the city. Beside him sat Sarah, the forensic accountant, her eyes locked on the glowing screen of her laptop. We had just laid out the entire, horrifying reality of my situation. My husband Thomas was stealing $450,000 of my hard-earned money to buy a luxury lakefront estate with his wealthy mistress. His sister Amanda was covering his tracks by forging my signature on federal tax returns. And Thomas had secretly filed for an expedited, uncontested divorce to solidify his theft. I sat across from my legal team, my hands resting flat on the cold mahogany table. The initial wave of blinding panic had passed, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. I looked at Marcus and asked him directly what our next move was. I told him we had to freeze the private bank account immediately. Marcus slowly turned his gaze back to me, his expression grim and deeply serious. He explained that a standard legal freeze would be a fatal mistake. If we filed a standard injunction today, the bank would be legally obligated to notify Thomas that his assets were under review. The moment Thomas received that notification, he would know I had discovered his trap. He would instantly cancel the closing on the lake house. With the help of his sister, he would immediately wire the funds into untraceable cryptocurrency exchanges or filter the cash through anonymous foreign holding companies. Marcus told me that if we tipped our hand even 1 minute too early, my money would vanish into the digital ether, and I would never see a single penny of it again. Sarah adjusted her glasses and leaned forward, her voice calm but intensely focused. She told me that we were dealing with a highly sophisticated financial maneuver. Because Brenda, the wealthy widow, utilized offshore trusts to manage her real estate portfolio, the money would leave United States jurisdiction the second the property transaction cleared. Sarah explained that we had to orchestrate a high-risk, perfectly synchronized counterattack. We could not freeze the account while the money was just sitting there, and we could not wait until the money arrived at the title company. We had to execute a federal emergency injunction at the exact moment the money was in transit. Sarah outlined the strategy with surgical precision. On Friday morning, Thomas would go to the title office to sign the final closing documents for the estate. At exactly noon, he would instruct his private bank to initiate the wire transfer. The funds would leave his secret account and enter the Federal Reserve Clearinghouse before being routed to Brenda's offshore trust. Sarah explained that there is a microscopic window of time, sometimes lasting only a few minutes, where a massive wire transfer hangs in a state of pending verification. We needed a federal judge to sign an emergency intercept order, and we needed to drop that order directly onto the banking network during that exact window. If we filed it too early, Thomas would get a bounce alert panic and hide the cash. If we filed it too late, the money would wash into the offshore trust, leaving me completely destitute. The timing had to be absolutely flawless. Marcus looked me squarely in the eyes. He told me that his legal team could handle the federal judge and the banking intercept, but he warned me that the most dangerous part of this operation rested entirely on my shoulders. For the next 3 days, Thomas had to believe his plan was working flawlessly. He had to feel completely in control. He had to feel so arrogant, so utterly confident in his own superior intellect that he would not check his accounts or alter his Friday timeline. Marcus told me I had to go back to that house and play the most difficult role of my life. I had to swallow my pride, hide my absolute disgust, and be the perfect, unsuspecting, vulnerable victim. I drove home that afternoon, with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The thought of looking into my husband's eyes and smiling made bile rise in the back of my throat. I pulled into our driveway, wiped my face perfectly clean of any emotion, and walked through the front door. The psychological warfare began almost immediately. Thomas needed a plausible narrative to justify walking out on his family on a Friday morning. He needed to fabricate a history of a toxic, unbearable marriage to sell to his friends, his colleagues, and to Brenda. Over the next 48 hours, I watched the man I had loved for a decade transform into a cruel, calculated monster. On Tuesday evening, the escalation started over a simple family dinner. I had spent an hour cooking his favorite meal after a grueling 10-hour shift at the retail regional office. I placed the warm plate in front of him. Thomas took one single bite, dropped his fork heavily onto the porcelain plate, and let out a loud, theatrical sigh of disgust. He pushed the plate away, looking at me with pure contempt. He told me the chicken was completely dried out and tasteless. He raised his voice, ensuring the twins could hear him from the living room. He accused me of being completely distracted, claiming I cared more about my retail spreadsheets than I cared about providing a decent home for my family. He stood up, towering over me, and shouted that he was exhausting himself, trying to save us from a massive corporate lawsuit, while I could not even be bothered to put a hot, edible meal on the table. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to fight back. I wanted to grab the plate and hurl it at his chest. I wanted to scream that I knew there was no lawsuit. I wanted to tell him I knew about Brenda. I knew about the secret bank account, and I knew about the hundreds of thousands of dollars he was stealing from his own children. My blood boiled hot and violent under my skin, but I remembered the words of my attorney. I remembered the offshore trust. I remembered the ticking clock. I forced my shoulders to drop. I slumped forward, shrinking myself down until I looked small and entirely broken. I let tears well up in my eyes, letting them spill down my cheeks in a display of pathetic vulnerability. I looked up at him, my voice trembling, and I apologized. I told him I was just so tired from work. I told him he was an incredible provider, a wonderful husband, and I was so sorry for failing him. I begged him to forgive me, wrapping my arms around myself as if I were falling apart. I watched his reaction through my tears. Thomas did not look sympathetic. He looked triumphant. A cruel, satisfied smirk flashed across his face. He felt like a god. He truly believed he had beaten me down into a submissive, compliant shell of a woman. He scoffed, told me I was pathetic, and stormed out of the kitchen, claiming he was going to get food somewhere else. I stood alone in the kitchen, wiping the fake tears from my face, my heart pounding with a dark, triumphant rhythm. The harder he pushed, the softer I became, and the more arrogant he grew. The cruelty continued into Wednesday morning. I was getting the twins ready for preschool, kneeling on the floor to tie their tiny shoes. Thomas walked down the hallway, fully dressed in a tailored suit, purchased with the money Amanda had helped him wash through our tax returns. He stopped in the doorway, staring down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disdain. He criticized my appearance. He told me my hair looked like a mess and my clothes were embarrassing. He said he was ashamed to be seen with a woman who had let herself go completely. He told me I lacked class, elegance, and ambition. He was deliberately comparing me to Brenda, his wealthy, glamorous widow. He needed to convince himself that discarding the mother of his children was entirely justified because I was simply not good enough for his elevated new lifestyle. I swallowed the burning humiliation. I did not defend myself. I looked down at the floor, letting my voice crack with manufactured shame. I told him I knew I was not perfect. I told him I would try harder to be the beautiful wife he deserved. I told him I was just so thankful he stayed with me, despite all my flaws. He laughed. It was a cold, arrogant sound that echoed off the hallway walls. He adjusted his expensive watch, told me not to bother, and walked out the front door. I kissed my children on their foreheads, packed them into the car, and drove them to school. I spent the entire day coordinating with Marcus and Sarah over secure, encrypted phone lines. We mapped out the exact sequence of events for Friday. We prepared the federal injunction paperwork down to the last comma. Every piece of the trap was perfectly primed. I just needed to survive one more night. Thursday evening arrived with a heavy, suffocating thunderstorm. The rain lashed furiously against the windows of our suburban home, drowning out the ambient noise of the neighborhood. The twins were asleep upstairs, completely unaware of the absolute destruction hovering over our family. I was sitting in the living room, folding a basket of laundry, playing the role of the quiet, obedient housewife. Thomas walked down the stairs. He was not wearing his casual evening clothes. He was wearing a sharp button-down shirt and dark slacks, looking entirely too formal for a rainy night at home. He carried a thick manila envelope in his right hand. His face was set in a rigid, deeply serious expression. The final act of his manipulative play had officially begun. He walked into the living room and turned off the television. He told me to come into the kitchen. The tone of his voice was cold, sterile, and completely devoid of any warmth or affection. It was the voice of a man conducting a hostile corporate takeover. I followed him into the kitchen. The bright overhead lights felt blinding. He stood on the opposite side of the granite island, creating a physical barrier between us. He opened the manila envelope and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He slapped them down onto the countertop. The sharp smack of the paper hitting the stone echoed loudly over the sound of the rain. He looked at me, his eyes entirely flat and empty. He delivered his prepared monologue with the smooth, practiced cadence of a seasoned salesman. He told me that the pressure of the corporate lawsuit was destroying his mental health. He claimed that the burden of our marriage, combined with my constant neediness and lack of emotional support, was driving him to the absolute breaking point. He told me he could no longer function in this toxic environment. He said he needed a clean break to save himself from total bankruptcy and mental collapse. I stared at him, keeping my breathing shallow and erratic, playing the terrified wife. I asked him what he meant by a clean break. He tapped his index finger against the stack of papers. He told me these were the final expedited divorce settlement documents. He explained that he had already filed the initial paperwork with the county magistrate, using the post-nuptial agreement I had signed last week. He claimed he was doing this to protect me. He spun a brilliant, terrifying lie, telling me that if we were legally divorced by tomorrow morning, the corporate creditors could not attach any liens to my future income. He slid a pen across the granite island toward me. It rolled and hit the edge of the documents. He told me I needed to sign the settlement right now tonight. He explained the terms with brutal, calculated efficiency. Under this agreement, I would take my 10-year-old sedan and a meager fraction of the checking account to pay the monthly groceries. He would take the house, assuming the massive debt of the home equity loan he had forged, claiming he was falling on his sword to save my credit score. There would be absolutely no alimony, and child support would be reduced to a negligible minimum due to his impending fabricated bankruptcy. I let out a loud, choked sob. I gripped the edge of the kitchen island, letting my knees buckle just slightly so I appeared physically weak. I begged him not to do this. I cried real tears, channeling all my burning rage and terror into a display of absolute devastation. I pleaded with him to stay, telling him we could fight the lawsuit together, telling him our children needed their father. Thomas did not flinch. His face remained a mask of cold, unyielding stone. He leaned across the kitchen island, placing both hands flat on the granite, bringing his face dangerously close to mine. The mask of the loving provider completely vanished, replaced by a ruthless, predatory threat. He lowered his voice into a dark, menacing whisper. He told me that if I refused to sign this document tonight, if I dared to hire a lawyer and drag this out into a contested court battle, he would destroy me. He boasted about his high-priced corporate defense attorneys. He threatened to drag me through a vicious, agonizing custody war. He told me he would use my 60-hour retail work weeks against me in court. He would paint a picture for the judge of a negligent, absent mother who cared more about her job than her own twins. He promised me that he would drain every single cent we had left on legal fees, leaving me entirely destitute, and he would take my children away from me forever. He stood up straight, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked down at me with absolute supreme arrogance. He felt like a king standing over a conquered peasant. He truly believed I was a gullible, exhausted fool who was entirely at his mercy. He pointed to the pen resting on the table. The rain battered against the glass door behind him, a violent, chaotic symphony, matching the storm raging in my own chest. He told me I was completely out of options. He demanded I pick up the pen and sign the papers immediately, or he would pack his bags, walk out the front door, and let his lawyers take my children away by Monday morning. The pages of the divorce settlement sat resting on the cold granite surface of the kitchen island. The stark white paper looked unnaturally bright under the harsh glare of the overhead fluorescent lights. Thomas stood on the opposite side of the counter, with his arms tightly crossed over his chest. He projected the aura of a benevolent ruler who was being tragically forced to make an incredibly difficult sacrifice for the greater good. I looked down at the document resting near my fingertips. My eyes slowly scanned the lines of dense legal jargon, carefully picking out the exact terms he had orchestrated with his high-priced defense attorneys. The sheer breathtaking cruelty of his plan was laid out before me in plain black ink. According to the terms of this finalized settlement, I was walking away from our 5-year marriage with absolute scraps. I was to receive the 10-year-old sedan, currently sitting in the driveway, a vehicle that already had a failing transmission and needed constant repairs. I was allowed to keep my own meager personal checking account, the one I used exclusively to purchase our weekly groceries and household supplies, and that was the entire extent of my settlement. There was virtually zero alimony awarded to me. The child support was calculated at an insulting fraction of the standard state minimum rate. The justification for this financial starvation was typed right there in the official addendum. Thomas claimed severe financial distress and an impending personal bankruptcy due to the fictional corporate lawsuit hanging over his brokerage. He was taking full ownership of the family house, graciously absorbing the massive home equity loan he had secretly forged in my name. He had positioned himself on paper as the tragic hero who was falling on his sword to protect his vulnerable family from total ruin. Every single nerve ending in my body was screaming in violent protest. I wanted to grab the heavy ceramic fruit bowl from the counter and smash it against the wall. I wanted to look him dead in the eye and tell him I had seen the outgoing wire transfer authorization for the luxury lakefront estate. I wanted to scream that I knew all about Brenda, the wealthy widow he was planning to move in with tomorrow afternoon. But Marcus, my litigation attorney, had sternly warned me against any emotional outbursts. One wrong move tonight, one tiny slip of the mask, and my $450,000 would instantly vanish into a Cayman Islands offshore trust before the sun even rose. I had to swallow my pride, bury my rage deep in my chest, and put on the performance of a lifetime. I let my shoulders collapse forward, adopting the posture of a woman whose entire world was crumbling. I drew in a ragged, shuddering breath, forcing my lungs to heave dramatically. I brought my trembling hands up to cover my face, letting out a loud, agonizing sob that echoed sharply off the kitchen cabinets. I squeezed my eyes shut, pushing hot, salty tears down my cheeks until my face was entirely wet. "Thomas, please do not do this," I begged, letting my voice crack and break with manufactured devastation. "Please do not tear our family apart. We can fight this lawsuit together. We are a team. We stood at the altar and promised we would weather any storm that came our way. Think about the twins. They absolutely need their father. How am I supposed to raise 2 children with nothing but an old car and a grocery budget?" I reached out across the wide island, my fingers grasping desperately at the sleeve of his expensive tailored shirt. He pulled his arm back sharply, stepping away from me as if my physical touch was completely repulsive. I watched his reaction through the veil of my fake tears. Thomas did not look conflicted. He did not look heartbroken or burdened by the weight of his fabricated bankruptcy. His chest puffed out slightly. A cold, arrogant smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. He was completely intoxicated by his own perceived power. He looked down at me, weeping uncontrollably on the kitchen floor, and felt nothing but absolute superiority. "It is over, Rachel," he said, his voice flat and entirely merciless. "I am drowning in massive corporate debt, trying to keep this family afloat, and you are entirely incapable of supporting me financially or emotionally. This marriage has become incredibly toxic. I need a clean break to save myself from total mental collapse. If you try to refuse this settlement, if you try to hire some cheap lawyer and fight me in court, I will unleash my defense attorneys on you. I will drag this out until you are completely bankrupt. I will tell a judge you are an unfit, absent mother who cares more about retail spreadsheets than her own children, and I will take the twins away from you permanently. You have no money. You have no power. Sign the paper." I channeled every ounce of the burning betrayal festering in my chest and amplified my weeping into a hysterical pitch. I slumped lower against the counter, my entire body shaking with calculated despair. I told him I was so incredibly sorry. I told him I felt like a complete failure of a wife and a terrible mother. I sobbed that I would do whatever he wanted, sign whatever he needed, as long as he promised not to take my babies away from me. I reached for the heavy, silver pen resting beside the legal documents. I made absolutely sure my hand was trembling so violently that I could barely grip the metal barrel. I looked up at him one last time, my eyes wide wet and pleading, giving his monstrous ego the ultimate validation he craved. He nodded slowly, pointing a firm, demanding finger at the primary signature line. I pressed the tip of the pen to the paper. The sharp scratch of the ink against the thick parchment felt incredibly loud in the quiet kitchen. I signed my name legally, relinquishing my marital rights and perfectly completing the trap he had designed. I turned to the second page and signed again, and then I signed the third. With every single stroke of the pen, I fed his massive God complex. I let him believe he was a master manipulator who had flawlessly outsmarted a gullible, exhausted woman. Thomas snatched the papers off the granite island the absolute second my pen lifted from the final page. He quickly checked the signatures, his eyes gleaming with a manic, victorious light. He carefully slid the documents back into the thick manila envelope and tucked it securely under his arm. He looked down at me, huddled by the counter, weeping loudly into my hands. "I will send a moving company for the rest of my personal things next week," he said coldly. "The lawyer will email you the finalized court decree by tomorrow afternoon. Do not call my phone tonight. I need space to breathe." He turned his back on me and walked briskly down the hallway. He grabbed his heavy trench coat from the hall closet. I heard him pull his cell phone from his pocket and dial a number. He did not even wait to step outside onto the porch before he started speaking. "Amanda, it is done," he said, his voice ringing with pure, unadulterated triumph. "She signed everything without a single fight. She completely bought the bankruptcy angle. Yes, I am leaving the house right now. Meet me at the bar on 4th Street. We are celebrating tonight. The clean break is officially complete." The heavy front door opened and slammed shut. The deadbolt clicked loudly. I listened to his rapid footsteps retreating down the concrete walkway. The electronic chirp of his car unlocking pierced the rainy night. The engine roared to life and the tires crunched heavily against the wet asphalt as he sped away down the street, racing to toast his grand victory with the sister who had forged my federal tax returns. The instant the sound of his engine faded completely into the distance, my tears stopped entirely. I wiped my wet cheeks clean with the back of my hand. My spine straightened and the mask of the broken, helpless victim vanished into thin air. I was no longer weeping. The kitchen felt dead quiet, and the cold, sharp reality of the ticking clock descended upon me. It was Thursday night. Tomorrow, at exactly noon, he would attempt to wire my stolen life savings to an offshore trust. I moved through the house with absolute silent precision. I walked up the carpeted stairs, stepping carefully to avoid every creaking floorboard. I slipped into the twins' bedroom. They were fast asleep, completely tangled in their soft blankets, their breathing even and rhythmic. I pulled 2 small duffel bags from the top shelf of their closet and began packing exactly what we needed. 3 days' worth of casual clothes, their favorite stuffed animals, and their little toothbrushes. I moved like a ghost in the dark room, folding tiny shirts and jeans, my mind entirely focused on the morning ahead. I went into my own bedroom and pulled a hardshell suitcase from under the bed. I did not care about packing nice clothes or expensive shoes. I packed my standard regional retail uniform, a few daily essentials, and went straight for the locked filing cabinet hidden in the back of my closet. I gathered our birth certificates, social security cards, passports, and the thick folder of pediatric vaccination records. I retrieved the encrypted, portable hard drive containing the absolute mountain of financial evidence against Thomas and Amanda, and shoved it deep into the zippered interior lining of my travel bag. Everything had to be perfectly staged for Friday morning. I planned to drop the children at my mother's house 2 towns over, safely out of reach, before I drove directly to the federal courthouse to join my litigation team. We were going to monitor his banking activity, live through the forensic back door, and drop the federal injunction the very second he tried to move the money. I zipped the suitcases shut and carried them down the stairs, in the pitch black, lining them up neatly by the front door, so we could vanish the moment the sun came up. I walked back into the kitchen to grab a glass of cold water. My throat felt raw and irritated from the fake sobbing. I picked up my cell phone from the counter to check the time and review a final text message from Marcus, confirming our morning legal strategy. But when I tapped the screen to wake it up, my blood turned to absolute ice. There was a stark, bright notification banner sitting alone on my lock screen. It was an automated digital alert from our family medical insurance and health savings provider. I unlocked the phone, my fingers suddenly numb and clumsy. I opened the application. The screen loaded slowly, displaying a glaring red warning message across the top of the portal. My login credentials had been permanently revoked. The primary account holder had initiated a total administrative lockout. I stared at the screen in pure, breathless horror. I had spent the last 5 years funding that health savings account with automatic deductions from my retail paychecks. It was a dedicated safety net designed exclusively to cover pediatric emergencies, urgent care visits, and unexpected hospital bills for the twins. It was the one account I thought was completely safe from his commercial real estate maneuvering. It was not enough for Thomas to steal my entire salary. It was not enough for him to forge a massive mortgage debt in my name. He knew I was packing up. He knew I was going to be left alone with 2 young children. He had just intentionally locked me out of the twins' emergency medical fund. The sheer psychopathic malice of the act struck me like a physical blow to the chest. He was ensuring that if one of our 5-year-old children woke up with a dangerously high fever tonight or broke an arm on the playground tomorrow morning, I would not even have the health savings access to pay a basic hospital copay. He was actively trying to strip me of every single financial resource, every tiny shred of safety before the sun even rose. He wanted me completely destitute, broken, and begging on my knees by morning. I squeezed the phone so hard, the glass screen protector groaned under the intense pressure. The deep, heavy silence of the house pressed against my ears. He thought he had left me with absolutely nothing. He thought he had successfully severed my final lifeline. but he had just poured pure gasoline on a fire he could not possibly control. The performance was over. The war was starting in exactly 8 hours. The pale light of dawn crept through the bedroom blinds, casting long gray shadows across the floorboards. It was Friday, the day the trap was set to spring. I lay completely awake, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the sound of running water from the master bathroom. My muscles were coiled tight, every nerve ending, buzzing with a toxic mixture of adrenaline and sheer exhaustion. Thomas was in the shower, humming a cheerful, upbeat melody that echoed off the tile walls. It was the sound of a man who believed he had just conquered the world. A man who thought he had flawlessly outsmarted the tired, gullible retail manager he called his wife. He emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a plush white towel, his hair perfectly combed back. He did not look like a man facing a catastrophic corporate lawsuit or impending financial ruin. He looked invigorated, practically glowing with a sickeningly triumphant energy. He walked into his walk-in closet and pulled down his expensive leather overnight bag. I watched him through half-closed eyes, my face carefully arranged into a mask of hollow defeat. I watched as he folded his custom-tailored dress shirts, the expensive silk ties he wore for high-profile client meetings, and a bottle of his signature cologne. He was dressing for a celebration, not a courtroom battle. I sat up slowly, clutching the duvet to my chest, letting my voice waver just enough to sound thoroughly broken. I asked him where he was going. Thomas zipped his leather bag shut with a crisp final sound. He turned to me, his face organizing itself into a mask of fake weary burden. He sighed heavily, dropping his shoulders to play the tragic hero one last time. He told me his defense attorneys had scheduled an emergency mandatory weekend mediation retreat at a private facility upstate. He claimed they were going to lock themselves in a boardroom for the next 48 hours to negotiate a settlement that would keep me and the twins out of bankruptcy. He looked me right in the eyes and lied with such effortless sociopathic ease that it made the blood freeze in my veins. He told me it was going to be a grueling weekend, but he was doing it all to protect us. I knew exactly where he was going. He was not driving to a legal mediation retreat. He was driving straight to the downtown title office to sit across a mahogany table from Brenda, his wealthy widow. He was going to smile his charming, predatory smile sign the closing papers on a multi-million-dollar lakefront estate and prepare to wire $450,000 of my stolen money to an untouchable offshore trust. But I did not scream. I did not throw the bedside lamp at his head. I simply nodded, looking down at my hands, and told him to please be safe. I thanked him for carrying such a heavy burden for our family. Thomas smiled, a cold, satisfied curve of his lips. He grabbed his briefcase, the one containing the forged post-nuptial agreement, and slung his overnight bag over his shoulder. He did not kiss me goodbye. He simply told me he would call me when the mediation was over and warned me not to bother his phone while he was in negotiations. I listened to his footsteps retreat down the stairs. I heard the front door open and close. A moment later, the deep rumble of his car engine vibrated through the quiet morning air. I waited until the sound of his tires faded completely down the suburban street. The absolute second the neighborhood fell silent, my defeated posture vanished. The heavy, suffocating blanket of the victim role fell away, leaving behind a woman driven by pure calculating survival. I threw back the covers and sprang out of bed. The clock on the nightstand read 7:15. The banking networks would begin processing large domestic wires by mid-morning, and his final authorization was scheduled for noon. The timeline was razor-thin. There was zero room for error, zero margin for hesitation. I rushed down the hallway to the twins' bedroom. I opened their door softly. They were curled up in their beds, their small chests rising and falling in peaceful sleep. A fierce protective warmth swelled in my heart, completely overtaking the cold rage directed at their father. I gently woke them up, keeping my voice light and cheerful. I told them we were going on a surprise morning adventure to their grandmother's house. They rubbed their sleepy eyes, confused but excited. I did not let them dawdle. I dressed them with rapid military precision, slipping their little arms into sweaters and tying their sneakers in record time. While the twins ate a quick bowl of cereal at the kitchen island, I ran upstairs for the final time. I pulled the hard-shell suitcase from my closet and double-checked the zippered lining. The encrypted portable hard drive was exactly where I had hidden it. That small black rectangle of plastic and metal held the entire blueprint of Thomas and Amanda's massive financial fraud. It held the fake invoices, the forged federal tax returns, the explicit emails with Brenda, and the damning wire transfer authorizations. It was the only weapon capable of destroying the flawless legal cage they had built around me. I zipped the bag shut and grabbed the folder containing our passports, birth certificates, and social security cards. I walked through the master bedroom, glancing at the unmade bed and the empty space where Thomas's overnight bag had been. I felt absolutely no attachment to this house anymore. It was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. It was a monument to 10 years of lies and manipulation. I turned off the lights, walked downstairs, and grabbed the twins' duffel bags. I loaded my children into the back seat of my 10-year-old sedan, securely buckling them into their car seats. I tossed the luggage into the trunk and slammed it shut. I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors. The morning air was crisp. The sky a clear, brilliant blue that starkly contrasted with the dark federal storm I was about to unleash. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway, completely abandoning the suburban illusion I had worked so hard to maintain. I drove the twins 2 towns over, dropping them off at my mother's house with a brief, tight hug and a promise to call her later that afternoon. I could not explain the details to her yet. The less she knew right now, the safer she was. Once I was back in the car alone, the real race began. I merged onto the interstate, heading directly toward the heart of the city, where the massive stone pillars of the federal courthouse loomed. The digital clock on my dashboard read 10:45. I was scheduled to meet Marcus and Sarah, my litigation team, in a secure conference room down the street from the federal building at 11:30. The traffic was heavy, a thick, crawling snake of morning commuters. Every time brake lights flared in front of me, my stomach tied itself into agonizing knots. The ticking clock in my head was growing louder, practically deafening. As I navigated through the dense city traffic, my cell phone chimed loudly from the passenger seat. The sudden noise made me jump, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight. I glanced down, the screen illuminated with a message from Thomas. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wondered if he had discovered I was gone. I wondered if the bank had flagged something early. I waited until I hit a red light at a busy intersection before picking up the phone. It was a photo message. I opened it, and the sheer arrogant cruelty of the image stole the breath right out of my lungs. It was a picture taken from the driver's seat of a brand new custom luxury sports car. The steering wheel prominently displayed a high-end European logo. The dashboard gleamed with expensive digital readouts, and the pristine leather interior looked incredibly plush. Through the windshield of the photo, I could see the reflection of a large glass corporate building. It was the downtown title office. Below the photograph was a short, brutally final text message. I read the words, and the venom behind them burned my eyes. Thomas had typed, "I decided to treat myself before the mediation. I will send a moving company to collect the rest of my things next week. Good luck, Rachel." He was not just buying a multi-million-dollar lake house with his mistress today. He had preemptively rewarded himself with a luxury vehicle, undoubtedly financed by the very same stolen funds he had washed through Amanda's fake accounting shell. The message was perfectly clear. He was absolutely certain he had won. He was telling me that our marriage was over, that he had taken everything of value, and that I was now entirely on my own, abandoned with an old car and a mountain of fabricated debt. I stared at the message as the traffic light turned green. A horn blared impatiently behind me. I tossed the phone back onto the passenger seat and pressed my foot hard onto the accelerator. He was sitting in the parking lot of the title office right now. In slightly over 1 hour at exactly 12 o'clock, he was going to walk into that building, sit next to Brenda, and execute the final wire transfer. The $450,000 of my life savings, my blood, my sweat, and my children's future would slide from his secret account into the federal clearinghouse. I navigated the final few blocks toward the federal district, the towering skyline rising up to swallow my car in its shadows. My hands were steady, my vision incredibly sharp. He thought he had left me destitute and broken. He thought he was walking into a new life of effortless wealth, but he had no idea that I was carrying the match that would burn his entire existence to the ground. The timing had to be perfect to the absolute second. If Marcus and Sarah dropped the federal emergency injunction too early, Thomas would hide the cash. If we dropped it too late, the money would vanish overseas forever. The final countdown had started, and the trap was about to snap shut. The mahogany table inside the downtown law firm felt like a slab of cold iron beneath my resting hands. The severe thunderstorms from the previous night had completely cleared out of the city, leaving behind a stark, brilliant blue sky that glared intensely through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 40th floor conference room. It was Friday morning. This was the final day of my old life, and the exact moment the trap was set to close. I sat perfectly still in the heavy leather executive chair, watching the digital clock on the white wall tick downward with a merciless, steady rhythm. It was 11:45. I had exactly 15 minutes until noon. I had 15 minutes until the man I had loved and supported for a decade attempted to erase my entire financial existence. To my left sat Sarah, the forensic accountant. She was typing furiously on a high-performance laptop, her posture rigid with absolute concentration. Lines of raw banking code reflected off the lenses of her specialized glasses. To my right sat Marcus, my lead litigation attorney. He sat with a thick stack of federal injunction paperwork resting securely under his right hand. He was completely silent, his jaw clenched tight. We were not operating like a standard legal team, preparing for a routine family court hearing. We were operating like a highly trained military strike team, waiting for the exact moment to launch a targeted missile. My stomach was tied into a twisted, painful knot of adrenaline and sheer terror. Marcus had warned me earlier about the microscopic margin for error. If we moved 1 second too early, Thomas would receive an automated security alert from his bank. He would immediately panic, realize his secret was compromised, and scramble the stolen funds into untraceable offshore cryptocurrency accounts before we could stop him. If we moved 1 second too late, the money would clear. The Federal Reserve vanish permanently into Brenda Sterling's untouchable Cayman Islands Trust, and I would be left completely destitute. The timing required absolute flawless perfection. Sarah hit a final command key, and the massive secondary monitor mounted in the center of the conference table flared to life. The screen displayed a live read-only feed of Thomas's secret private wealth management account. Marcus had worked tirelessly through the night, utilizing emergency ex parte motions and a highly specialized judicial subpoena to secure this digital backdoor directly into the banking framework. We could not touch or move the money ourselves, but we could watch every single keystroke Thomas made in real time. The account balance sat there glaring at me in bold black numbers, $450,000. I stared at that number, and a heavy, suffocating wave of realization washed over me. That number was not just currency. It was the physical manifestation of my entire adult life. It represented every single regional manager bonus check I had earned. It represented every overtime shift, every missed lunch break, and every cheap, worn-out cardigan I had worn so we could save for the future. It was the college fund I had carefully built for my 5-year-old twins. It was the fraudulent home equity line of credit that Amanda had washed through our federal tax returns, a debt that would leave me homeless by the end of the month. It was all pooled right there on the glowing screen, waiting to be stolen. My mind drifted away from the cold monitor and traveled across the city to the luxury downtown title office. I knew exactly what was happening in that plush, mahogany-paneled closing room. I could picture Thomas sitting in an oversized leather chair, wearing his expensive, custom-tailored suit. I could clearly see Brenda Sterling, the wealthy, overbearing widow, sitting intimately beside him. She would be draped in designer clothes, smelling of imported perfume, acting like she had just won the ultimate prize. I knew the eager title agents were probably pouring them tall flutes of expensive vintage champagne to celebrate their multi-million-dollar lakefront estate purchase. I imagined Thomas smiling his charming, predatory smile. I pictured him raising his crystal glass to toast his new life, absolutely certain that he had orchestrated the perfect crime. He truly believed he was a master manipulator. He thought I was sitting at home right now, weeping over the cruel divorce settlement he had forced me to sign the night before. He thought I was utterly broken, financially ruined, and completely clueless. The harsh contrast between his arrogant champagne-soaked celebration and my gritty, terrifying reality burned through my veins like liquid fire. For years, I had exhausted myself working 60-hour weeks to build a secure, loving foundation for our family. He had taken my blind loyalty, twisted it into a weapon, and used it to fund his grand exit strategy. But looking at the blinking cursor on Sarah's monitoring screen, the pain of that betrayal evaporated entirely. It was replaced by a cold, calculating, and ruthless determination. I was no longer a heartbroken victim begging for her husband to stay. I was a professional corporate auditor executing the final phase of a hostile financial takeover. The digital clock on the wall flipped to 11:50. 10 minutes left. The silence in the conference room was absolute and incredibly suffocating. No one spoke a single word. No one even reached for a glass of water. We were all staring intently at the glowing monitor. Sarah held her fingers hovering mere millimeters above her keyboard, ready to strike. Marcus picked up a secure encrypted landline telephone from the center of the table. He dialed a private number, establishing a direct open audio connection with the federal judge's clerk, who was standing by in chambers to ratify the emergency intercept order. The air in the room felt incredibly thin, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out through the ventilation system. I focused entirely on my breathing, forcing slow, measured breaths into my burning lungs. I had to remain entirely grounded. I could not let the sheer magnitude of the moment crush me. The red numbers on the wall changed to 11:55. My heart hammered a frantic, violent rhythm against my ribs, beating so loudly I thought the others could hear it. On the secondary monitor, the dormant banking interface suddenly flickered. The screen refreshed and a new secure session was initiated. Thomas had logged in. A collective breath hitched in the conference room. Sarah leaned much closer to the screen, her eyes darting rapidly across the incoming packets of data. She whispered to Marcus and me that he was officially inside the portal. She confirmed he was navigating away from the summary dashboard and moving directly into the outgoing wire transfer module. My mouth went completely dry. We were watching him execute the theft live step by agonizing step. The screen updated again as Thomas began filling out the necessary digital forms. A new recipient profile was added to the secure portal. The name, Brenda Sterling Real Estate Trust, appeared on the screen accompanied by a long, complex, offshore international routing number. The destination was exactly what Sarah had predicted during our initial strategy meeting. It was an untouchable, unregulated banking haven designed specifically to shield liquid assets from domestic civil litigation. We watched in absolute silence as Thomas typed in the transfer amount. First a 4, then a 5, then 4 consecutive zeros. The total populated on the screen, $450,000. He was transferring the entire balance of the account, draining it down to the last stolen penny. He checked a box on the screen selecting the immediate execution option. He was actively overriding the standard 24-hour clearing delay by agreeing to pay a premium expedited processing fee. He was not leaving anything to chance. He wanted the money out of the country instantly. The clock ticked forward. It was 11:58. 2 minutes remained. Sarah looked over at me, her face pale but incredibly resolute. She told me he was currently reviewing the final confirmation screen. She explained he was likely waiting for the exact stroke of noon to align the digital transfer with the physical signing of the property deed at the title office. Marcus tightened his grip on the telephone receiver. He spoke in a low, sharp whisper to the federal clerk on the other end of the line, confirming that the injunction file was queued and ready for the judge to apply the digital signature. We were hovering right on the precipice of total financial ruin or absolute, undeniable victory. The clock shifted to 11:59, 60 seconds remaining. I stared unblinking at the monitor, my entire existence reduced to the pulsing green authorize button on Thomas's banking interface. Every single sacrifice I had ever made, every late night shift I had worked, every tear I had shed over the past week culminated in this singular digital moment. I thought about my twins playing safely at their grandmother's house, completely unaware of the brutal war being waged for their survival. I thought about Amanda, my treacherous sister-in-law, probably sitting in her trendy loft right now, smugly believing her fraudulent tax returns had successfully buried my future. And I thought about Thomas, sitting next to his wealthy mistress, raising his glass, about to push the button that would destroy my life. The digital clock on the wall clicked to exactly 12 o'clock noon. On the massive monitor, the green authorize button flashed brightly and suddenly turned gray. Thomas had hit send. The massive life-altering sum of $450,000 left his private account and plummeted directly into the federal banking network. Now Marcus shouted. Sarah smashed her hand down onto the enter key of her laptop with incredible force. Marcus spoke a single sharp command into the telephone receiver. In a federal building, 3 blocks away, a judge executed a secure digital signature. The emergency asset freeze injunction launched directly into the Federal Reserve clearinghouse system, racing through the fiber optic cables to intercept the outgoing cash. The conference room fell into a terrifying, agonizing stillness. The live monitoring screen shifted away from the banking dashboard and displayed a buffering graphic. A small blue circle spun endlessly in the center of the display. The wire transfer was actively attempting to clear the domestic servers. The federal injunction was racing to intercept it before it crossed the international boundary. It was a digital collision, happening in a fraction of a second, but sitting in that leather chair, it felt like an eternity of pure torture. I stopped breathing entirely. My fingernails dug deep into the solid mahogany table, leaving faint crescent marks in the polished wood. The blue circle kept spinning, mocking my anxiety. 5 seconds passed. 10 seconds passed. 15 seconds. Sarah leaned so close to the monitor, her nose almost touched the glass. Marcus stood up from his chair, his eyes locked on the spinning icon. I knew the stakes perfectly well. If the circle turned green, the money was gone forever. If it turned green, Thomas had won, and I was completely ruined. Suddenly, the screen froze. The spinning blue circle completely vanished. A massive, glaring red dialog box erupted across the entire monitor, flooding the room with a harsh crimson light. The text inside the box was bold, sharp, and absolutely glorious. Transaction denied. Account frozen by federal mandate. Sarah let out a loud, breathless gasp of pure, unadulterated relief. She slumped back heavily into her chair, dragging a shaking hand through her hair. She looked over at me, a massive, victorious smile breaking across her face. She whispered that we got it. She confirmed the money never crossed the international line, and the entire account was permanently locked down by the federal government. Marcus slowly hung up the telephone receiver. He looked physically exhausted, but his eyes shone with sharp, professional triumph. He nodded firmly at me, confirming the kill. The trap had officially snapped shut. Thomas's stolen money was completely paralyzed. The closing on the luxury lakefront estate was dead in the water. Brenda Sterling's offshore trust would receive absolutely nothing. The crushing, suffocating weight that had been sitting heavy on my chest for a week evaporated into thin air. A warm wave of overwhelming, euphoric adrenaline crashed over me. I'd actually done it. I had beaten him at his own twisted game. I had protected my children and saved my own life. But the victory was not fully complete yet. Less than 30 seconds after the red denial banner appeared on our screen, the triumphant silence in the conference room was violently shattered. My cell phone began to vibrate aggressively against the wooden table. The caller ID flashed brightly in the center of the dark screen. Thomas was calling. Marcus and Sarah both looked down at the phone, and then they looked up at me. They remained completely silent, knowing the final act of this operation belonged entirely to me. I reached out and picked up the vibrating device. The metal felt cold and heavy against my sweaty palm. I took one last deep breath, clearing my mind of any lingering fear, any remaining hesitation, and any trace of the obedient, submissive wife I used to be. I pressed the green accept button and slowly lifted the phone to my ear. "Rachel, what the hell is going on?" Thomas's voice exploded through the tiny speaker so incredibly loud and frantic that I had to physically hold the phone an inch away from my head. He was absolutely losing his mind. His smooth, arrogant composure had completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. "Rachel, the bank just locked me out," he screamed. His breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. The wire transfer bounced. The title agent is screaming at me, and Brenda is threatening to walk away from the table. "What did you do? Did you call the bank? Tell me what you did right now." I sat in the leather chair and listened to his hysterical, desperate shouting. I pictured him standing in the middle of that luxury closing room, his face pale and sweating with sheer panic, his perfect plan burning to ash, right in front of his wealthy mistress and her lawyers. I did not raise my voice to match his volume. I did not yell, and I did not cry. I spoke into the receiver with a calm, quiet, and absolutely lethal precision. "I signed the divorce, just like you wanted, Thomas," I said, ensuring every single syllable landed like a physical blow to his chest. "But a federal judge decides where my money goes. Enjoy the housewarming." I did not wait to hear his response. I did not want to hear his pathetic excuses, his empty threats, or his fabricated lies. I pulled the phone away from my face and firmly ended the call. The screen went completely black in my hand. I placed the phone face down on the mahogany table and looked out the massive windows at the clear, brilliant city sky. The war was far from over, but the most important battle had just been won. The silence in my lawyer's conference room was a beautiful, heavy thing. I had just hung up the phone on the man who thought he could discard me like trash. But the avalanche I had triggered was only just beginning its descent. Through the detailed updates from my legal team and the frantic, unhinged voicemails Thomas would leave on my phone throughout the afternoon, I was able to piece together the exact flawless sequence of his spectacular ruin. In that plush downtown title office, the atmosphere had shifted from a luxurious celebration to a suffocating nightmare in a matter of seconds. Thomas was standing on the imported Persian rug, surrounded by mahogany paneling and sweeping views of the city skyline. Just moments before, he had been sipping expensive vintage champagne, feeling like an absolute king. Brenda Sterling, the wealthy widow he was planning to build his new life with, sat beside him, draped in diamonds and silk, waiting for the transaction to clear. But the escrow agent, staring at his computer screen, did not offer them the final closing documents. Instead, the agent's face drained of all color. He looked up at Thomas with a mixture of confusion and deep professional alarm. He announced to the room that the $450,000 wire transfer had been violently rejected by the Federal Reserve. He read the glaring red notification out loud, stating that the originating account had been locked under a strict federal fraud injunction. Thomas felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead, ruining his perfectly styled facade. He scrambled for his phone, pulling it from his tailored suit jacket, trying to desperately play off the federal freeze as a simple banking error. He flashed his signature charming smile at Brenda, assuring her that it was just a minor administrative glitch that he would sort out immediately. But Brenda Sterling was not a naive retail manager. She was a ruthless corporate titan who had inherited and expanded a massive logistics empire. She did not survive in the maritime shipping industry by believing the frantic excuses of a sweating, desperate man. her sharp, predatory instincts immediately locked onto the truth. She looked at the escrow agent and demanded to know the exact nature of the injunction. When she heard the words federal fraud mandate, her entire demeanor shifted from affectionate warmth to absolute freezing disdain. She realized in an instant that the charming, successful real estate broker she thought she was dating was actually a total liability. He did not have the money to fund his half of the multi-million-dollar lakefront estate. He was entirely broke, and worse, he was radioactive. A federal investigation was a disease she refused to catch. Thomas reached out to touch her arm, begging her to just give him 24 hours to clear up the misunderstanding. Brenda stood up slowly, her designer heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She looked down at him with a gaze so filled with pure disgust that it made him physically shrink back. She did not yell or cause a hysterical scene. She simply raised her hand and delivered a brutal, resounding slap across his face. The sharp crack echoed off the mahogany walls, leaving a bright red handprint spreading across his cheek. She told him he was nothing but a pathetic parasite trying to latch onto her wealth to save himself from his own catastrophic failures. She turned to her legal counsel standing by the door and ordered them to cancel the contract immediately and sever all business ties with his brokerage. Without another word, she walked out of the luxury suite, taking her lawyers and her pristine reputation with her. She left Thomas standing completely alone in the center of the room, clutching his stinging face, while the title agents quietly asked him to vacate the premises. While Thomas was being escorted out of the building by security guards, the second phase of my counterattack was crashing down on the other side of the city. My sister-in-law, Amanda, was sitting in her boutique accounting firm, completely oblivious to the federal storm heading her way. She had used the money she stole from my children to rent a trendy glass-walled loft in the financial district. She was likely sipping an artisan espresso, admiring her expensive watches, and congratulating herself on a flawlessly executed financial crime. But the forensic evidence I had delivered to my litigation team was an absolute masterpiece of documentation. It was so thorough and so damning that the federal authorities did not wait to issue a polite subpoena. They moved with terrifying, immediate force. The heavy glass doors of Amanda's stylish office swung open, and a half-dozen federal agents in dark windbreakers marched into the reception area. They did not ask for permission. They presented a federal search and seizure warrant directly to her terrified receptionist. Amanda stepped out of her private office, her arrogant smile faltering as she saw the armed agents swarming her business. The lead investigator approached her and read her the specific charges listed on the warrant. They were seizing her physical servers, her filing cabinets, her personal laptop, and her digital communication devices. They informed her that she was the primary target of an active federal investigation into wire fraud, tax evasion, and the forgery of federal financial documents. The investigator handed her a formal notice from the State Board of Accountancy, stating that her certified public accountant license was immediately and indefinitely suspended, pending the outcome of the criminal probe. Amanda completely collapsed. The smug, sophisticated architect of my financial ruin instantly dissolved into a hysterical, weeping mess. She watched in sheer horror as agents unplugged her computers and boxed up the exact fraudulent tax returns she had manipulated to hide her brother's stolen wealth. She knew the federal government had a conviction rate of over 95% when they brought tax fraud charges. She was not just losing her business and her luxurious lifestyle. She was staring directly at a decade in a federal penitentiary. In a state of blind, panicked desperation, Amanda grabbed her personal cell phone before an agent could confiscate it. She ran into the hallway and dialed her brother. Thomas was currently sitting on the concrete curb outside the downtown title office, feeling the first agonizing waves of total defeat. His face still burned from Brenda's slap. When his phone rang and he saw his sister's name, he answered, hoping for a lifeline, hoping she could use her accounting magic to bypass the frozen accounts. Instead, he was met with a shrill, ear-piercing scream. Amanda did not offer comfort. She launched into a violent, feral verbal assault. She screamed that federal agents were currently ripping her office apart, pulling the fake invoices and the forged home equity loan documents from her servers. She demanded to know what he had done, crying that Rachel had somehow managed to turn all their secrets over to the authorities. Thomas completely snapped. The man who always maintained a perfect, composed exterior finally lost his mind. He screamed back at her, standing on the busy city sidewalk, totally unconcerned with the pedestrians watching him. He blamed Amanda for everything. He told her she was a terrible accountant who was supposed to cover their tracks securely so my lawyers could never find the money. He yelled that she had failed him and ruined his life. Amanda shrieked that she only forged the documents because he begged her to help him leave his miserable marriage. She told him he was a sloppy, arrogant fool who could not keep his pants zipped and his lies straight. In a matter of seconds, the unbreakable sibling alliance completely disintegrated into a vicious battle of pure self-preservation. Amanda threatened to turn state witness. She promised to take the witness stand and testify that every single fraudulent transfer was entirely his idea, hoping to negotiate a plea deal for herself to avoid federal prison. Thomas threatened to throw her right under the bus with him, claiming he would tell the judge she manipulated his taxes without his full understanding. They tore each other to absolute shreds over the phone, burning the last remaining bridge they had in the world. Amanda finally hung up on him, leaving him listening to a dead dial tone. Thomas slowly lowered the phone from his ear, his hand trembling violently. The sky above the city was a clear, mocking blue, but his entire universe had plunged into total darkness. He stood up from the concrete curb, feeling a heavy, suffocating panic settle deep into his bones. He had spent months meticulously planning my destruction. He had wanted to leave me begging for scraps, fighting to feed my children while he sailed off into a life of effortless wealth and luxury. But now, as the lunch hour traffic rushed past him, the absolute totality of his ruin finally became clear. He reached into his pocket to retrieve his wallet, hoping to hail a premium car service to take him away from the city center. But he suddenly realized his credit cards were tied to the exact same banking profile that the federal judge had completely paralyzed. His access to cash was entirely terminated. The dealership where he had just purchased his luxury sports car was going to repossess the vehicle by the end of the day when his down payment wire inevitably bounced. He had no money to pay for a taxi. He had no house to return to because I had already secured the locks and armed the security system before leaving with our children. He had no wealthy mistress waiting to rescue him because Brenda had permanently severed all ties and blocked his number. He did not even have his own sister to rely on because she was currently being interrogated by federal agents and plotting to testify against him to save her own skin. He was completely alone, stranded on a busy sidewalk, with nothing but the expensive clothes on his back and a dead cell phone in his hand. The crushing reality of the situation washed over him. The arrogance and the massive god complex he had wielded like a weapon were completely gone. He was no longer a wealthy corporate player executing a hostile takeover of his own family. He was a broke, isolated, and incredibly desperate man. And the most terrifying part was that he knew the pain was only just beginning. The federal freeze on the bank account was merely the opening shot. My legal team was already drafting the massive civil fraud lawsuits, the emergency custody orders, granting me full physical control of our twins, and the criminal referrals to the district attorney for his role in the forged home equity loan. He looked up at the towering glass skyscrapers of the financial district, feeling entirely small and insignificant. He had tried to bury me alive, but he had only succeeded in digging his own spectacular grave. The trap he had spent a year building had snapped shut on his own neck, and the real legal slaughter was just getting started. The courtroom was a vast chamber of heavy mahogany and polished marble. The air inside felt thick and ancient, carrying the absolute gravity of the law. I sat at the petitioner's table with my spine perfectly straight. I wore a sharp, tailored navy blue suit that I had bought specifically for this occasion. I did not look like the exhausted, frightened retail manager who used to wear faded cardigans and apologize for breathing too loudly. I looked like a woman who had walked through an absolute inferno and emerged forged in solid steel. Marcus and Sarah flanked me like a seasoned military guard. They sat with their briefcases open completely, ready for the final execution. Across the wide center aisle sat Thomas. The transformation in him was absolutely staggering. The arrogant, charming real estate broker with the $1,000,000 smile was completely gone. In his place sat a hollowed-out, desperate man. His suit hung loose and rumpled on his frame, as if he had lost 15 pounds in a matter of weeks. His skin was pale and drawn tight over his cheekbones, and he could not stop his hands from violently shaking on top of the legal desk. He looked over at me with wide, bloodshot eyes, but I did not offer him a single trace of emotion. My face was a mask of absolute freezing calm. The honorable judge entered the room and took her seat at the high wooden bench. She was a woman in her late 50s with a stern, unyielding expression and sharp eyes that had clearly seen every possible variety of human deception. She had spent the last 3 weeks meticulously reviewing the absolute mountain of forensic evidence we had submitted. She had seen the forged tax returns, the fraudulent shell company invoices, the explicit offshore routing instructions, and the fake post-nuptial agreement. When she finally spoke, her voice echoed off the wood-paneled walls with the devastating force of a falling gavel. She looked directly down at Thomas and completely eviscerated him. She stated for the official public record that in her 30 years on the bench, she had rarely seen such a breathtaking display of premeditated financial cruelty and moral bankruptcy. She methodically dismantled his entire defense, tearing apart his fabricated bankruptcy claims piece by pathetic piece. She declared the post-nuptial agreement entirely fraudulent and legally void, noting that it was obtained through extreme documented coercion and fabricated corporate threats. She addressed the secret bank account and the forged home equity loan with a tone of absolute, unfiltered disgust. She stated that Thomas had intentionally and maliciously attempted to leave the mother of his children entirely destitute while laundering marital assets to a wealthy widow's offshore trust. The legal hammer came down with breathtaking speed and total finality. The judge awarded me 100% of the recovered $450,000. She ordered that the family home be transferred solely into my name, with Thomas held entirely and personally liable for the forged equity debt he had created. She looked directly at his defense attorney and stated that due to his documented history of financial instability and psychological abuse, Thomas was stripped of all joint custody rights. I was granted full sole physical and legal custody of my 5-year-old twins. He was awarded only strictly supervised visitation, assuming he was not currently incarcerated. But the absolute final blow came at the very end of her ruling. The judge informed the court that because Thomas had utilized his professional standing to commit massive wire fraud, she had officially forwarded his case to the state regulatory board. His commercial real estate broker's license was permanently and irrevocably revoked. Furthermore, she confirmed that her court was fully cooperating with the active federal investigation. Thomas was staring directly down the barrel of severe criminal charges for bank fraud. His sister Amanda was already sitting in a federal holding facility, awaiting her own sentencing for tax evasion and conspiracy. Their entire corrupt, arrogant empire had been completely leveled to the ground. Thomas buried his face in his hands, weeping loudly in the quiet courtroom. It was a pathetic, hollow sound. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the immense, beautiful weight of the justice that had just been handed down. I had fought a terrifying war against a man who held all the cards, and I had absolutely won. Marcus gently touched my arm and gave me a warm, incredibly proud smile. We stood up and gathered our files, leaving Thomas sobbing at the defense table. As I walked out of the heavy courtroom doors and into the wide marble hallway, I felt a profound sense of physical lightness. The suffocating dread that had lived in my chest for months was completely gone. I thanked Marcus and Sarah for their brilliant dedication, and we parted ways at the security checkpoint. I walked alone towards the main exit, but before I could reach the revolving glass doors, a frantic, desperate voice called my name. I turned slowly. Thomas was running down the hallway toward me, his face red and heavily streaked with tears. He looked absolutely frantic, completely stripped of any remaining dignity or pride. He stopped a few feet away from me, panting heavily. He actually fell to his knees on the cold marble floor, causing a few passing lawyers to stop and stare in blatant curiosity. He reached out as if to grab the hem of my coat, but I took a sharp step back, removing myself entirely from his reach. "Rachel, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, miserable whine. "Please, give me another chance." I was completely out of my mind. It was not my fault. Brenda manipulated me. She got into my head and made me think I needed all that luxury. And Amanda, she was the one who forged the documents. She told me it was a foolproof plan. I never actually wanted to hurt you or the kids. I was just stressed and confused. "Please, Rachel, we can start over. I have absolutely nothing left." I stood there and looked down at the man who had been my husband. I listened to him blame his wealthy mistress and throw his own sister completely under the bus just to save his own skin. He had not learned a single thing. He was still the exact same selfish, cowardly man he had always been. Only now, the glamorous mask was entirely gone, and the ugly, pathetic truth was completely exposed for the entire world to see. I did not yell at him. I did not scream or curse or tell him how much I hated him. I realized in that exact moment that I did not hate him at all. Hate requires energy and emotional investment. I simply felt absolutely nothing for him. He was a complete stranger, a ghost from a past life that no longer existed. I calmly reached up and adjusted the collar of my navy blue coat, smoothing the fabric with steady, confident hands. I looked him dead in the eyes with a gaze of absolute freezing indifference. I did not offer him a single word of comfort, anger, or closure. I simply turned my back on his weeping form and walked away. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the brilliant afternoon sunlight. The warm air hit my face and I took a deep, clean breath. The sound of his pathetic crying was permanently left behind me, completely drowned out by the vibrant, beautiful noise of the city. The months that followed were a whirlwind of beautiful, exhausting rebuilding. With the recovered funds securely resting in my own protected accounts, I sold the old house that held so many dark, heavy memories. I took my twins and we moved forward without looking back for a single second. I bought a beautiful, sunlit home in a completely different suburb, located in one of the absolute best school districts in the state. The house has a wide wraparound porch, a massive kitchen filled with natural light, and a huge, sprawling backyard lined with tall, ancient oak trees. It is not a house built on lies or secret debts. It is a home built entirely on my own strength, my own intelligence, and my own unyielding boundaries. On a warm Saturday afternoon, I stood at the kitchen sink, washing fresh strawberries for my children. I looked out the large window into our backyard. The twins were running through the green grass, laughing hysterically as they chased our new golden retriever puppy through the sprinklers. The bright sunlight caught the water droplets, turning them into tiny, sparkling diamonds in the air. I leaned against the counter and simply savored the absolute profound peace of the moment. There were no more late-night anxieties about hidden bank accounts. There were no more exhausting performances trying to please an arrogant, demanding partner. There were no more secret phone calls or manipulative sister-in-laws. My life was completely my own again. I had taken the absolute worst betrayal imaginable and turned it into the solid foundation for a beautiful, secure, and fiercely independent future. I realized that the fire Thomas had tried to burn me with had simply forged me into something unbreakable. I was a mother, a professional, and an absolute survivor. I had looked total destruction in the face, and I had not blinked. To all the women watching this story right now, I want you to listen to me very carefully. We are taught to be giving. We are taught to sacrifice for our families, to build up our partners, and to pour our own life force into making a beautiful home. And there is incredible, noble beauty in that kind of love. But you must never, ever let your devotion become a weapon for someone else to use against you. Blind trust is incredibly dangerous. You can love your partner with your whole heart, but you must keep your eyes wide open. Do not ignore the financial realities of your own household. Do not let someone else control your access to your own future. Financial independence and a sharp, observant mind are your absolute ultimate shields in this world. Protect your peace, protect your children, and never apologize for setting unyielding boundaries. When they try to back you into a corner, remember that you have the power to tear down their entire cage. If this story gave you strength today, if it reminded you of your own incredible worth and power, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel right now. We are building a community of strong, independent survivors here, and I want you to be a part of it. And please leave a comment below, letting me know what state are you watching this from, and what time is it right now. Let us all stand tall together. You are never as trapped as they want you to believe. Have a beautiful day.